Chapter 1312. Terrified. Yes. He was a F***king coward. Perhaps he was trying to conserve his energy, or perhaps he felt that he had to leave a useful body for the next battle. This burly dwarf took out a tower shield from his storage bag, and carried it on his back. He changed his axe to a shield in his left hand and a hammer in his right. From afar, he looked like a tortoise if he didn't have the Balrog hammer. Duke rolled his eyes and decided not to bother with this guy anymore. He spread out his spirit sense and sensed that although Jaina and the others were in a sorry state, they were fine. Duke exhaled a breath of turbid air. Phew, all right. Although I don't know who taught you to divide and annihilate, but since you're so good at it, I can't hold back. Let's deal with you quickly and meet up with the others. Suddenly, Skirim replied to Duque. Long live Sithun, Duque. Huh? This guy could talk. He didn't have much of an impression after fighting so many times. After all, this guy wasn't strong and hadn't been wiped out many times. But your boss Sithun is already more than 10,000 years old. Are you sure you want to wish him long live? Duque laughed shamelessly and made his move. Prophet Skirim was faster than Duque. He instinctively sensed that the elemental state around Duque wasn't right. So he didn't choose to use Magic Burst. Instead, he let his main body and doppelganger release Great Earthquake Strike. At the same time, Duque frowned. Skirim had obviously held back just now. When that shocking force of nature hit him, he instinctively realized that if he was in his normal state, he would definitely be sent flying by this force. No, being sent flying was already a good thing. The worst thing was to be hit by 3 great earthquake strikes at the same time. That scene would probably be like a pile driver. He would become a pillar and be driven deep into the ground. Mag was about to remind Duque to be careful. However, he saw that Duque did not make any extra movements. He just pressed one hand into the void, and suddenly, a faint sound of wind whistling and thunder rumbling rang out. He didn't make any big movements. It was as if he was flipping a page in a book. It was very natural. In that instant, it was as if Duque's hand had grasped the power of the entire world. It was as if the entire cycle of life and death was within his grasp. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The natural elemental shockwave that should have punched a few large holes in Duque's seemingly thin body instantly disintegrated and dissipated with this action of Duque's. No! Prophet Skirim shouted. In the blink of an eye, the radiance of the arcane technique lit up, and 3 identical Skirims appeared beside Duque in a triangular formation, firmly surrounding him. The 3 Skirims, whose upper bodies resembled lobsters, had fanatical expressions on their faces as they raised their claws in unison and shouted, "Go to hell!" The purple radiance of Magic Burst immediately lit up on the main body and the 2 doppelgangers. Duque laughed shamelessly. Sure enough, monsters are monsters? Or is it that those who aren't in human form have lower intelligence? Bang! Bang! The arcane energy explosion that enveloped Skirim's body suddenly stopped. The purplish-blue radiance on the 3 guys' bodies all rushed out uncontrollably and condensed into hundreds of arcane missiles in midair. In an instant, they shot back at their own bodies. Then Mag heard bang, bang. 2 shattering sounds rang out, and the 2 boss doppelgangers that had been bothering him for a long time exploded. Impossible! Skirim shouted. Impossible? Duque smiled. Idiot! Let me tell you. If I can't enter the divine domain as the god of magic, then I will settle for the next best thing, and become a god as the god of arcane magic. After teasing for a while, Duque didn't waste any more words and directly pointed at the index and middle fingers of his right hand. Chirp! A sound rang out. Duque's fingers seemed to extend infinitely. Of course, it wasn't that Duque's fingers became longer, but the arcane energy instantly shot out from his fingertips. It was hard to describe whether it was an arcane missile or an arcane sword. The arcane elemental light that shot out was incredibly fast, and in less than 1/100th of a second, it pierced Skirim's throat. It was clearly magic, but it was no less cold than any divine sword in the world. This was both magic and a long sword condensed from magic. The sword light was full of killing intent, and the momentum of the sword could pierce through any hard shell that wasn't protected by divinity. Clang! At the moment when Duque's long arcane sword pierced Skiram's throat, Skiram, who was a general under Thun, finally reacted at the critical moment. The huge red pauldrons, no, it should be a part of its body, the hard shell on the left and right shoulders suddenly closed. The solid shell locked the incoming sword edge, so that the long arcane sword couldn't move an inch. Duque's 2 fingers bent slightly, and then poked out again. Obviously, Duque didn't reveal any emotion, but Magni, who was next to him, had a completely different feeling. He seemed to hear the sound of a sword resounding through the world, and a terrifying killing intent surged. The pure arcane energy burst out like a flood. Duque's calmness formed a sharp contrast with Skiram's and Magni's nervousness. Clang! The long sword that seemed to have been locked a moment ago became 2 sharper arcane daggers in the next instant. This time, the hard shell couldn't stop it anymore, and the 2 more agile energy daggers pierced through with unparalleled force. There was no time to dodge, let alone block. There was only a pu sound, and the 2 daggers pierced Skiram's throat in an instant. There were no more 50% and 25% clones left. The arcane energy that rushed into Prophet Skiram's body destroyed it like lightning, and sucked away all of its life force in one breath. Skiram's huge body, which weighed several tons, collapsed with a loud bang. Magni was dumbfounded. Duque, that's it. Duque's eyes rolled back. How long do you want to fight? I'm a demigod now after all. To deal with a leader-level creature that doesn't even have divinity, do I have to fight for a day and a night before I barely win? Are all demigods so awesome? Alright, I'll become a demigod too. Duque ruthlessly attacked Magni. Let's wait until you become a legendary hero first. Legendary heroes weren't a real level. It was purely to distinguish the powerhouses who had stepped into the realm of heroes from the powerhouses who were infinitely close to the realm of demigods. It was a level that adventurers boasted about themselves. Chapter 13:13. But the rank of legendary heroes seemed to be solidifying recently. It couldn't be helped. According to the realm of heroes, the newly promoted Valilla, Brawl, and the earlier batch of Riataline and Lilith were all heroes. But the difference in strength between them and the oldest batch of heroes was too great. Not to mention Tyrion Fordring, the most senior Empress Dowager. Even Vanessa could easily defeat Valera. After all, Vanessa's strength was honed through countless bloody battles. Compared to Valera, who could only bully mortal gladiators in the arena or beat up small monsters, it was a completely different concept. If Vanessa hadn't been so busy recently, Valilla would have chased after Vanessa every day to ask for a duel. The same thing happened to Riataline. She was already the most powerful paladin among the Blood Elves. Even without divine equipment, Gavin Rad still relied on the more intense holy light to take down Riataline with one hand. And in the tavern, in the comments of the upper echelons, heroes who had experienced so many battles were unknowingly promoted to the new rank of legendary heroes. Naturally, there was a new standard for legendary heroes. Only those who could take down a divine creature alone could be considered a legendary hero. Hearing Duque's words, Magni bared his teeth. Good. There are too many things to do now. The Iron Furnace Castle needs a powerful guardian. I'll go train after defeating Thun. Duque stretched out his hand. He had wanted to take Prophet Skiram's spoils of war and leave, but the system elf suddenly gave him a notification. The soul of this creature has been detected to be compatible with the magic net. Would you like to capture it? If captured, there is a 94% chance that it can be converted into a magic net processor after purification. What kind of benefit is this? Looking at the system notification carefully, Duque decisively clicked yes. He only saw Duque's right hand pinch the air, and then a translucent spirit of Skiram was pulled out of the body by Duque. Nimble fingers flew in the air, and then Skiram's soul was shredded like a butcher dismembering an ox. The extra spider legs, shoulder armor, and arms were all cut off and shattered in the void, leaving only a purple-blue soul core, which was finally taken by Duque's palm. The corners of Duque's mouth rose, and he suddenly smiled bitterly, because he found that what he was doing now was almost the same as what Kil'jaeden had done to Nazul back then. However, the egg always destroyed Nazul's body and stuffed it into an ice skeleton. Duque was a bit more thorough. He completely erased Skiram's soul imprint, which meant that the miserable Skiram would no longer have any memories and would only be left with the instincts of a caster. Duque had received a system notification the moment he'd brought Cram to the Weave. Arcane Soul Compatibility Test complete. The Weave has obtained a new metamagic ability, Enhance Magic Blast. This ability can increase the critical hit rate of Magic Blast by 10%. Holy sh*t. There's actually such a suffocating operation? Come to think of it, it made sense. Skiram had always used teleportation and Magic Blast to blast his enemies until they wished they were dead. It wasn't surprising that his soul had the ability to enhance Magic Blast. Originally, Duque had no interest in small bosses other than Thun, but now it was completely different. This was a great opportunity to collect metamagic abilities. Ever since he'd opened the Weave, Duque had suffered enough. There was no other reason. It was because he didn't earn much. It was different from what he'd imagined. Simply saving mana would not bring more benefits to Duque, but providing metamagic abilities, which were more profitable value-added services, would allow Duque to fill his pockets. At this moment, Duque felt that his hobby of collecting had awakened. In the underground cave thousands of meters away, Jaina and Alicia's sudden outburst had only slightly improved the situation of the hero group. Without the entanglement of the small monsters, the hero group faced the fierce attack of Sartura again. After the Weave was forcefully expelled by Thun's power, the hero group had lost a more effective way to fight back. Under the attacks of Sartura, who charged at them like a brainless whirlwind, the team members were forced to split into two groups. One group successfully charged into the hole in midair, while the other group had to land on the ground to face the family of three. The family of three and Sartura's combination was indeed terrifying, but it wasn't much better for them to charge into the hole, because there was another boss guarding the hole. It was the fourth boss of Ankiraj, the tenacious Fankaris. It had 6 legs and a trident tail. It had bright yellow skin and red stripes, and it was a commander-tier monster with the body of a scorpion. Fankaris's fighting style was quite irritating. It would constantly summon small insects and even elite sandworms to cause trouble. And it had a strong attack that could tear apart the highest level epic armor of this era. The most disgusting thing was its teleportation. It would occasionally teleport a team member into its nest, and they couldn't do anything but take the beating of the small insects without struggling. Of course, Fankaris's problem was child's play compared to the danger below. It wasn't just the family of three. Even the leader of the ooze monsters, Vistus, had come out. This meant that the team below had to endure the crazy attacks of 5 bosses at the same time. It was obvious that there was a commander behind the scenes directing these leaders to perfectly divide and eliminate the Alliance heroes. Damn it. Gugugi. Gavinrad was the first to suffer. When he was the first to land on his fire eagle, he was also the first to be ambushed. The leader of the ooze monsters, Vistus, suddenly jumped out from under the sand and swallowed Gavinrad along with his fire eagle. Gavinrad activated his invincibility almost immediately. So what? The paladin's holy shield spell only lasted for slightly more than 10 seconds. Once the time was up, Gavinrad felt like he was drowning in the corrosive mucus. If it wasn't for the fact that his entire body was filled with holy light, and the windsword's nature attribute slightly resisted the corrosive mucus, Gavinrad would probably have been the first to die in this battle. The scales of victory for the Alliance were still tipping in the direction of collapse. William led his men into the cave and faced Fankaris head-on. Magni stayed on the surface, and only Boulang and Theon were left to tank the boss. Due to the need of battle tactics, Riadaline had come down wearing an armor that strengthened the Holy Light spell, and she couldn't change it in time. Be careful. Before Theon could finish his sentence, Sartura had already swooped down for the kill. The claws on her 2 legs stretched out. Since she didn't manage to hook the more agile Queen Sylvia, she flapped her wings and suddenly changed her target, grabbing Kalia who was beside her. She wanted to tear Kalia in half in midair. Just then, a teleportation door appeared out of nowhere in the air behind her. Chapter 13-14. This portal that appeared in the air 50 meters in the air was not visible at all if one was not a ranger hero with the sharpest eyes. But the timing of the portal's appearance could be said to be perfect. It was the moment when Sartura raised her white veil and revealed a cruel smile as she flew. Suddenly, Sartura's smile froze on her face. The portal that appeared out of nowhere seemed to have been forcibly torn open by the fingers of countless pure white mage hands. In the purple-blue rift, a golden spiral sword suddenly stabbed out. It was the golden light that seemed like the birth of all things. It was the light of the first glimmer of dawn. It represented hope and the banishment of evil darkness. It was impossible to avoid. Sartura, who was flying at high speed, could not avoid it at all. Accompanied by a scream, even if she twisted her body at the last moment. At least 2 of Sartura's cicada wings were cut off by the golden sword. She still wanted to pull Kaliao away, but after cutting off her wings, the spiral sword's momentum suddenly changed, drawing a beautiful arc in the air. If she did not let go of her claws, her legs would not be able to move. In the choice of tearing apart an insignificant human or saving her legs, Sartura was decisively terrified. She did not even have time to increase her strength to hurt Kalia, and directly let go of her claws. Kalia screamed, and a second later, she fell into an incomparably warm and familiar embrace. Duque, is that you? Is it really you? Once again narrowly escaping death, looking at Duque's familiar yet somewhat unfamiliar face, Kalia's tears easily broke the dam. She stroked Duque's face, completely unable to control herself, and began to cry. Duque gently carried Kalia in a princess hug. It was only at this moment that the spatial rift behind him turned into countless drifting fragments, and finally turned into nothingness. Looking at the battered and exhausted battle situation, in the depths of Duque's dark eyes, there seemed to be a dazzling golden flame burning. He opened his mouth, and his voice shook the entire dark cave. It's the twin emperors, right? Not a bad plan. Almost caused irreparable damage to the alliance. And almost hurt my lover. But since I'm here, then this farce should end. Get out here. Otherwise I'll kill my way to see Thun. The buzzing in the air was a display of power, a change in the laws. The weave, which had been rejected outside the temple, once again began to crack like glass in the air. Duque showed everyone the gap between mortals and god domain experts. The first thing that entered Duque's line of sight was the sludge monster boss, Vistus, who had swallowed Gavinrad. Gavinrad was desperately swimming inside the ooze monster's body. Oh, it should be called struggling. Even if Gavinrad had the strength and time to swim in there for a year, he wouldn't be able to swim out. The green mucus would surge in the opposite direction, pushing the victim back to the center. Unfortunately, Vistus was a rare monster that was immune to both soft and hard tactics. Because the ooze monster didn't have a fixed body, it couldn't take physical attacks. In essence, it wasn't an undead. What was even more ridiculous was that it couldn't even be considered an evil creature. Holy light was useless against it. In addition, it was of the nature attribute. Even the wind sword was ineffective against it. The bitter Gavinrad was suppressed to death by it. Gavinrad, who had experienced many battles, really wanted to kneel. Seeing Gavinrad struggling like a nailed frog, Duque forcefully connected to Gavinrad through the weave and communicated with him through telepathic thoughts that could transmit thousands of messages per second. Boss! Help! Gavinrad was definitely in tears and snot. What? You can still hold on? Then I'll save the others first. Duque was up to no good and deliberately played dumb. Boss, you can't play me like this. I've been your guard for so long. Even if I don't have any credit, I've worked hard. Back then, you were flirting with girls in the room, and I was sitting outside, drinking and drinking. Gavinrad's voice was already shocking to the point of tears. Alright, I won't tease you anymore. Thank you for saving my life, boss. To outsiders, the telepathic thoughts communication happened in less than 1/100th of a second. Everyone only saw Duque holding Kalia in midair and attacking. Hundreds of snow-white threads of light shot out from every finger of his free left hand. At first, they were just threads, but in the blink of an eye, they turned into the sharpest frost arrows, pouring down on Vistus' body like a torrential rain. That's right, this sludge monster leader's biggest weakness was frost. It could not be dealt with by a simple blizzard spell, but a large number of frost arrows. Only the frost arrows could easily freeze the well-hidden small cores in the sludge monster's body. If this were a game, They would have to form a large group of mage players and use a large number of frost arrows to kill this thing. Since Duque, who was a demigod and a mage demigod, was here, the other mages had nothing to do. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Suddenly, a flurry of frost arrows shot out like a snowstorm, and everyone only saw Vistus instantly freeze. The originally disgusting soft body turned into a large pile of green ice that looked like poop. In the next second, the iceberg that affected the appearance of the city cracked open with a kacha. Wah! I, Gavin Rad, am back. On his forehead, Gavin Rad, who had the color of a grassland, waved his wind sword, like a god of war who had returned from a latrine pit, bursting out of the iceberg in anger. Sally Whitemane burst out laughing. Don't blame others for looking down on him. In fact, his dignified appearance also affected the city's appearance, and it emitted an unpleasant stench. At the same time, Duque attacked again. This time, Duque directly drew on the magic power in the magic net, and used the frost element to instantly create a large iceberg, forcibly separating the family of three. When Duque turned around again, Vistus happened to explode. It was like some mischievous little brat throwing 250 kilograms of firecrackers into a latrine pit, and then exploding them to his heart's content. Bang! That was awesome. Many girls were already far enough away, but now they were even more respectful. However, after witnessing the changes that happened to Vistus after he exploded, they still felt like vomiting. The huge ooze monster boss suddenly turned into 20 piles. System notification. Vistus cells are proliferating wildly. If more than 1/3 of the cells are not destroyed in a single division, Vistus will be revived with full health. Duque raised his eyebrows. 1/3? In the next second in the system annotation, the words divine creature almost blinded Duque's titanium dog eyes. F***CK. Cursing in his heart, Duque directly attacked. Chapter 13-15. In the legends before Duque transmigrated, abominations were mutated divinity monsters that were born between normal deities. There was no such thing as abominations in the world of Azeroth, because the few ancient deities themselves had a special appearance that affected the appearance of the city. A normal human would never have thoughts like tentacle control or tentacle play. Recalling the glory of the big eyeball tentacle monster from Seathun's memory, Duque really felt that he was doing justice on behalf of the heavens by destroying these guys. At this moment, the frost elements around Duque became thousands of times more active. Countless magic arrays appeared on the magic net nodes that extended from the void beside Duque. Sharp frost arrows took shape in an instant and surged out of the magic net, raining down on the 20 disgusting green lumps of squirming on the ground. Although Vistus's cell proliferation and blood recovery plan was awesome, the price of such a huge recovery of HP was its defense. It was completely defenseless. This was purely a gamble born of biological instinct. It was a gamble on whether the enemy's attack power could surpass its recovery ability. If the frost attack was not strong enough, Vistus was an immortal existence that could not be killed. Relying on skills such as acid spit, there would always be a time when the enemy would be exhausted to death. But if the attack was strong enough, lumps of green biological tissues were eroded by the unhindered influx of frost magic. Every green cell in its body began to crystallize. Just like people with large areas of frostbite, they often needed to amputate their limbs because all the cells in the limbs had been frozen to death. The water in the cells began to crystallize, which in turn pierced through the cell walls, causing the cells to die. The 20 lumps of Vistus clones began to freeze again. It was a kind of silent wail. Even if the bystanders could not understand it, they could easily see the green mucus tissues solidifying once again. This time, there was no more fragmentation or recovery. Almost every cell was directly filled with high-purity frost elements. They had lost their lives forever, let alone the ability to regenerate. Vistus was completely dead. Heh! A family of 3 not far away roared in unison. They were angry at Duque for killing their companion. Of course, Duque had no time to pay attention to this defeated dog's wail. He lowered his head and carefully examined the item in his hands. System notification. Host, you have obtained 2 basic units of Divinity of Chaos. Note: Divinity of Chaos, the power of the divine realm that is irregular. It can easily raise a creature's level and greatly increase its combat power, but its weakness is that it can easily cause a creature to enter a berserk state. If it was only at this level, Duque would definitely throw it away like trash. Fortunately, there was another sentence in the remark. Do you want to purify it? If the chaos elements are removed, it is estimated that one basic unit of order divinity of unknown attributes will be produced. Duque blinked. What basic unit? It's too much of a mouthful. Let's call it point instead. Alright, I want to extract 1 point of order divinity from 2 points of divinity of chaos. What's the price? The system elf replied. It is estimated that it will take 365 Azeroth days, and there is a 45% chance that the purification will fail, which in turn will bring adverse effects to the host. Duque understood what the system elf meant. Purification was actually a process of mutual influence. Although light and darkness were interchangeable in this world, nothing was completely pure. The more absolute a power was, the harder it was to purify it. System elf, is there anything I can do to increase the success rate? If I use a greater amount of order power to purify it, the failure rate can be greatly reduced, and infinitely close to zero. The communication between Duque and the system elf's divine sense was only for a moment in the outside world, and outsiders did not even notice that Duque was in a daze. In Duque's perception, an enemy was approaching at high speed from behind. Originally, Sartura was very fast, but after she abandoned the whirlwind slash that would slow her down and added all her strength to her speed when she swooped down at high speed was quite shocking. Although many people were unwilling to admit it, it was already a little like the speed of sound. The attack arrived before the sound was heard. Unfortunately, Duque had already spread out the weave. Even if Sartura's rash charge in a straight line was faster, the elemental vibration caused by her was no different from a huge wave in the weave. How could Duque not sense it? Little Alugia was about to remind Duque, but found that Duque's figure had already become a blur. Sartura pounced on Duque's afterimage. Caw caw caw. The light that burst forth from Duque's afterimage turned into a bunch of crows that flapped their wings and cawed. The ear-piercing sound, coupled with the strange undulations in the air, instead interfered with Sartura's judgment. For a moment, no one expected Sartura to be stunned at Duque's previous position. Duque's figure appeared again, this time to her left. However, the sudden stab of the spiral golden sword was caught by Sartura's claw. The spiral sword spun at high speed in the claw, making a zzz sound similar to the scraping of metal from a grinder. I've caught you. Sartura suddenly laughed coldly. No, I've caught you. Duque responded with a polite smile. His smile caused Sartura to have a bad feeling. Sartura guessed correctly, but it was too late. Duque had a headache dealing with a boss with high speed and high agility like her. This was Thun's territory. It was possible to open a teleportation door here, but to use continuous flash, that was very difficult. If Sartura stubbornly avoided him, and only ran to kill the other heroes of the Alliance, Duque would also have a headache. Since Sartura recklessly rushed over, Duque of course would gladly accept it. The spiral golden sword that seemed to be stuck suddenly burst forth with a golden light that was enough to blind any evil creature. Sartura instinctively wanted to run, but unfortunately in that moment of daze, the golden light had already turned into a large net, instantly covering half of Sartura's body. In the next moment, the head of a chicken leg staff was pressed against Sartura's cheek. Duque's short hair suddenly stood up along with the elemental tide that burst forth from his body. From the very end of the hair, the fire element that flowed out made Duque look like he had a head of fiery red hair. In the bright firelight, it reflected the cold expression on the face of this new demigod. Although Duque's body was already similar to many burly human males in this world, compared to her huge body, he was very small, only a third of her size. But now, in everyone's perception, Duque's body seemed to have suddenly grown 100 times larger, becoming a giant that could support the heavens and the earth. His pair of eyes seemed to be made of the purest obsidian, shining brightly and incomparably deep. The terrifying power that surged like a sea of fire formed a very dazzling ball of light, making the fire element gather crazily on the head of the staff at an extremely fast speed that bystanders could not imagine. Chapter 13:16. Compress. Compress. Compress again. In just 1/100th of a second, this dark cave that hadn't seen the light of day for thousands of years returned to the embrace of light. Facing such a powerful enemy, not only Sartura, but every leader of Encourage felt a sense of helplessness and fear rise in their hearts. No, Sartura screamed shrilly, and then did something that no one expected. She suddenly flashed, and no one knew how she did it, but in order to escape, she actually cut off her arm that was sealed by Duque. Not only that, a small part of the shoulder armor that was connected to her arm, yellow and green bodily fluids splattered all over the place, along with some pieces of her internal organs. She made such a huge sacrifice just for that moment of opportunity to escape. What a pity! Just as she escaped, Duque also flashed. The staff head that looked simple and unadorned, like a wooden chicken drumstick, was still stuck to Sartura's face at the same distance. Not an inch more, not an inch less, still sticking close to Sartura's face. Not bad courage, too bad there's no reward. Following Duque's mockery, the demigod-level flame blast, smashed out from the staff head of Atish, directly exploded at 0 distance. Ah! Sartura let out the most tragic howl since the start of the battle. Her seemingly pretty face was originally covered by a veil. But under the terrifying power of the flame blast, all of her true form had to be revealed. That was the unique mouthpart of an insect creature. The 2 cockroach leg-like antennae were instantly blasted in half, and half of its face instantly caved in. Its twisted neck couldn't help but have a large area of scorch marks appear on it. If it was just a simple flame blast, it wouldn't be able to take her life. In the next moment, only the people with the most powerful eyesight could see that the flames that should have exploded in all directions gathered again under the control of Duque's astonishing elemental control. 2 consecutive attacks. It wasn't as simple as duplicating the attack twice, but rather gathering the scattered elements once again, and launching another destructive attack in an extremely short amount of time on the opponents already injured, and starting to be damaged. Perhaps, in the eyes of those with poor eyesight, Duque instantly killed Sartura. Only those who saw this scene clearly would feel the shock of looking up to a great mountain. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The flames spread wantonly in the sky. Sartura's scorched black half-body fell heavily into the yellow sand at the bottom of the dark cave. This is the 3rd one. Prophet Skirum, Vistus, and Sartura. Then Magni, who had just come out of the portal that Duque had opened for him, muttered to himself. It was only at this moment that the Alliance powerhouses realized that as soon as Duque appeared, he had already killed 3 of Cthulhu's generals. Roar! In the dark sky, the 2 beasts, Onyxia and Princess Huhuran, were fighting fiercely. The shockwaves from the clash of fire and nature elements continuously tortured the already unstable cave walls. The murals on the walls melted in the flames, and the acid that Princess Huhuran spat out splattered everywhere. More rocks collapsed and fell. The Alliance heroes who were fighting with the family of 3 had to constantly pay attention to the top of their heads to avoid being affected by this waterfall of rocks. The 2 larger bugs in the family of 3 easily caused the sand and rocks on the ground to form layers of broken waves, causing the Alliance heroes to be in a sorry state. The Rangers with light movements could still make do, but the others had to worry about whether they would fall into those ghastly cracks or be swept into the earthquake-like area. Duque didn't have the time to care about all of this. He didn't even have the time to look at what spoils of war he had gotten from killing Sartura. That was because in the darkness in the distance, 2 humanoid creatures that were 7 to 8 stories tall were charging over. Duque put Kalia down and said to Jaina, "I'll leave this to you." If it was possible, Duque naturally hoped to gather his superior forces to deal with the enemy. For example, he could leisurely take care of all the weaker leaders of the enemy, and then face Cthulhu with a leisurely attitude. Unfortunately, he couldn't. In the battle between the 2 princesses in the sky, Onyxia clearly had the absolute upper hand. If he wanted her to decide the winner immediately, it would be difficult for her own mount. Rushing to decide the winner meant taking risks. Attacking recklessly was never Onyxia's forte. The Black Dragon Princess was better at using careful and continuous attacks to force the opponent into a desperate situation, and then killing them without suffering any injuries. Only when the situation was urgent and there was no other choice would Duque strictly order her to attack fiercely. So at this moment, Duque gave her a reassuring message. Onyxia, just fight at your own pace. Thank you, Master. Duque was a demigod, and one whose strength far exceeded hers. A demigod who had the chance to reach the highest position. Compared to being forced to serve a lowly human before, the current Duke made Onyxia feel better about her reputation. Being the mount of a powerful demigod sounded better than being the mount of a human. If not for the fact that they were in a fierce battle, Onyxia would have run over and taken the initiative to ask to tame a dragon. In a higher cave, half of the hero team led by Varian was fighting with the tenacious Fancaris. Obviously, the outcome would not be decided in a short period of time. It seemed that Oro's early death and the fall of Naxxramas had deeply stimulated Si Thun's side. Other than Oro and Si Thun, who was guarding the underground palace, all the leaders of Encourage who could fight were here. The two enemies who had come at this moment were naturally the twin emperors, Vecnala's the Great and Vec, Lor the Great. Facing the twin emperors in the Temple of Encourage, whose strength was second only to Si Thun, only Duque could come personally. Tyron suddenly thought of something and exclaimed, "Wait! Duque, isn't one of the twin emperors immune to magic?" Duque laughed. If someone else had asked him, he would have definitely replied, "Who do you think I am?" As Duque's lover, Tyron naturally did not need to refute. There was only a confident smile. In his left hand was the most simple and unadorned divine artifact magic staff, a Tish, legendary staff of the Guardian. In his right hand was the sharp divine artifact longsword, Marcus, Song of Light and Darkness, with a peculiar spiral conical shape. Clang. At this moment, the sound of the sword resounded through the 9 heavens. The spiral sword in Duque's hand suddenly became dazzling. The entire holy sword seemed to have turned into the purest light, becoming the brightest light in the world. This sword illuminated the entire hell-like underground cave of the Temple of Encourage. At this moment, not only did Duque's whole body burst out with the power of a demigod, but also a surging sword intent. Duque did not say a word. His attitude said everything. Today, not just a demigod, I will even kill a god for you to see. Chapter 13-17. The Twin Emperors. They had an incomparably deep impression in Duque's memory. After all, the Twin Emperors pioneered the warlocks as tank bosses. There was no other way. Because under Si Thun's divine blessing, Emperor Vec Lor, commonly known as the Demon Emperor, was completely immune to physical attacks. He could only be injured by magical elements. On the other side, Emperor Vec Lor, who held a giant sword and was commonly known as the Sword Emperor, was completely immune to magic. The divine power wrapped around his body would instinctively expel all magical elements. So the traditional way of fighting was to have a tank with the highest armor in the team carry the Sword Emperor, and another warlock carry the Demon Emperor. Unfortunately, all the powerhouses in the Alliance hero group were in the middle of a fierce battle. There was no melee hero who could carry the monsters to help. Duque really wanted to take action again before the Twin Emperors arrived and free up some people, but unfortunately, he could not. For gazes full of powerful divinity crossed space and darkness and locked onto Duque. He did not know what went wrong, or if the history of Azeroth had taken a further serious turn. The Twin Emperors were demigods. As long as Duque dared to run and kill the other leaders just now, the Twin Emperors dared to teach Duque a deep and unforgettable lesson. Yes, if Duque dared to go and bully the noobs, then the Twin Emperors could too. They had known each other for so long. Even Valera and Brawl, who Duque had the least interaction with, were regarded as partners by Duque. Duque did not want to see anyone from the Alliance hero group die. So Duque's choice was to go straight up. At this moment, Duque's sword intent was high, and his sword intent was above all living beings, suppressing the entire Zerg race. In this dark and vast sky, Duque was the strongest existence that the Twin Emperors could not avoid. The Twin Emperors stopped far away. The Sword Emperor planted his giant sword on the ground, while the Demon Emperor put his hands on his hips. They were waiting for Duque to go over. A new demigod. That chaotic place should not be a demigod stage. Come here, a great battle needs a great stage. The twin emperors echoed each other, giving people the feeling of a two-man show. However, for a pair of brothers who had gone through thick and thin together, even sharing their life force, this kind of conversation couldn't be any more normal. The cloak on Duque's back fluttered in the wind as the elemental storm surged from Duque's body. A faint smile hung on Duque's face. At this moment, everyone could feel that they were bathed in Duque's battle intent, not in a smile. It was as if the spiral sword had replaced the sun hanging high in the sky, becoming the only source of light in this underground palace. In the next second, a wave of arcane elemental energy formed a huge wave, gently lifting Duque up. In the next second, a purple-blue arcane energy warship appeared. It supported Duque's body and moved forward proudly, arriving in front of the massive twin emperors. To the left was Sword Emperor Vecnalas. On the right front was the Demon Emperor Warlord. They spoke. We are called the Twin Emperors. Sword Emperor waved the sword in his hand. I am Vecnalas. The Demon Emperor waved his staff. I am Vecnalas. We bear the same fate. From the day we were born, we lived together, worked together, and faced the enemy together. The true battle of the pinnacle will be sung through the ages. The human demigod powerhouse Duke Marcus. The Emperor's modesty makes us disdain to fight two against one. You can choose a partner. This is our respect for you. This is also the respect you have for us. The words that seemed like a tongue twister didn't make Duque dizzy. Instead, it made Duque see an opportunity. Duque said in a teasing tone. Huh? If I fight you 2 against 2 and we win, will there be additional prizes? Sword Emperor's glistening yellow eyes widened. The winner gets everything. The Demon Emperor's similarly colored eyes darkened. The loser loses everything. The winner's reward should not be discounted. The loser's etiquette should be done to the extreme. If you and your comrades win, you will get what you want. If I and my brother win, we will also get a real reward from Master. Duque found the Twin Emperor's wager very interesting. Unfortunately, where could Duque find a partner who could fight against the Twin Emperors? Because the Twin Emperors would heal each other when they were close to each other, Duque's partner had to be at least 60 yards away to face one of the Emperors alone. This meant that Duque couldn't choose a warrior to tank the monsters. For example, even if Magni had the descent of God, he couldn't last that long. A real demigod was very difficult to kill in an instant. For example, when Master Howl killed the demigod Cenarius, it was ultimately because Cenarius used the forest as the source of his power. At that time, the entire Grey Valley and Fellwood Forest had already been infiltrated and polluted by demons. Cenarius' power was greatly reduced, and that was how Master Howl's shocking battle record came about. Duque knew that the Twin Emperors relied on those disgusting beetles. And on Courage, the number of insectoids was easily in the millions. His battle with the Twin Emperors was destined to be a tug-of-war. Magni definitely couldn't last that long. Duque cleared his throat. Just as he was about to say that he didn't have a partner, a graceful female figure that Duque was very familiar with stood beside Duque like lightning. I, Servana's Windrunner, Queen of Sindorii, Duque's partner, will partner with Duque in this battle to fight against you. Duque was embarrassed on the spot. His mouth was half open, opening and closing like a fish that had been scooped out of the water, sucking in air fiercely. Queen, she was proud. From the day Duque met her, she didn't feel that she was inferior to anyone. It was fine during the second battle at the Dark Portal. What she couldn't stand the most was during the third battle, when her hometown was destroyed, but she couldn't do anything about it. Time flew, and the man who had conquered her body and mind had already become a demigod who looked down on all living things. As someone by his side, as a proud expert, as a queen who was determined to take revenge, she couldn't allow herself to stay where she was. So, this time, she wanted to challenge her limits. Duque's hands were trembling. Even he couldn't guarantee that he had the strength to look after Queen Shi. He really wanted to say something, but when the words reached his mouth, he couldn't say a single word. Instead, it was Queen Shi who spoke first. What? I'm not the weak Kalia. And I'm not one of those seductive sluts who swayed their lewd bodies to tempt you. From the day I was born, I was destined not to be the kind of weakling who was willing to be protected by others, and who needed to be carefully cared for. Remember, my name is Servanas Windrunner. Her sonorous and forceful words shook Duque's soul. He really wanted to argue, really wanted to forcefully hold her down, and not let her do anything stupid. Suddenly Duque smiled. Chapter 13:18. Yes, this is the Sylvanas Windrunner I know. Even at the end of his life. Even at the other side of the dead. Servanas who never gave up fighting against fate. In Duque's harem, there was obviously a hierarchy of power. Unlike Queen Sylvanas, Jaina, and Tyrant, who stood at the top of the mortal realm, Kalia and Alicia were lagging behind. Especially Kalia, as a greenhouse flower trapped in the Forbidden Palace in her early years, it was really difficult for her to participate in the cruel boss battles. Duque knew very well that Kalia did not want to be ostracized in the harem and become a mere flower vase or mascot. It was for similar reasons that Alicia chose to be the queen and to accompany him in battle. Queen Sylvanas, on the other hand, wanted to become stronger, hoping that she could shoulder the hopes of her fellow elves, hoping to take revenge on the scourge that destroyed her homeland. Stubbornness, resistance, and desire were the greatest motivations for her to become stronger. This was also why she chose to stand beside Duque at this moment, to fight against an enemy that she could not defeat. To be honest, Queen Sylvanas was very uneasy now. Her being here could be said to be courageous, but also reckless. As a mortal god, getting involved in a battle between demigods, one mistake would lead to eternal damnation. But she was not resigned to it. Courage was like a spine. In the face of danger, if you yielded once, it was easy to do it a second time, a third time, and you would never be able to stand up straight again. Who knew when the spine of courage would break? Sailing against the current, one who did not advance would be pushed back. She could not let it go, and had no reason to let it go. In her heart, Queen Sylvanas was prepared to be reprimanded by Duque, or even chased away by force. She even thought of dozens of reasons to argue with Duque. But there was no anger, no lesson. All she got was a look that said, "I understand you." Infinite gentleness, and infinite trust. Not a single word. Instead, he just leaned over, hugged her waist just right and kissed her gently. It wasn't the first time they had kissed, and it wasn't even the first time they had deep contact. However, this kiss made her feel like a little girl who didn't understand the ways of the world. It was as if she was in a dream. It was warm and full of moisture. After their lips parted and they stood up straight again, Duque and Servanas were no longer lovers. At this moment, they were comrades. The twin emperor's glistening yellow eyes stared at Queen Sylvanas for a long time, feeling deep veneration. A peak existence among mortals. He also has extraordinary courage. We are the twin emperors. I recognize you as my opponent. Queen Sylvie held the bow in her left hand and flung her cloak with her right hand, revealing an Arather gold coin. She flicked it into the air with her thumb and said loudly, "When the coin lands," the twin emperors replied in unison, "the moment when we start fighting each other." Duque's face stiffened. "All right. The twin emperors, come." The golden coin kept spinning in the air. It seemed to have lost the restraints of time and kept spinning, spinning, and spinning. The golden light kept flashing, but the four hearts were getting more and more nervous. After what seemed like a century, the coin finally fell to the ground, making a crisp clang sound. The twin emperors' bodies, which were at least 7 stories tall, were like mountains toppling over, pressing down on Duque and Queen Sylvanas. At the same time, Queen Sylvanas and Duque moved at the same time, and shot out like an arrow. Queen Sylvanas strode with lightning speed, and in the midst of her mad dash, she had already shot 3 arrows at the magic-immune sword emperor, Vecnolus the Great. The sharp arrows drew a straight line in the air, bringing with them 3 bolts of lightning as they pierced straight at Vecnolus. Vecnolus did not even frown. The broadsword, which was as wide as the main beam of a building, came crashing down, and the light of the sword drew a strange arc in the void. Whether it was a person or an arrow, it was impossible to resist the edge of the Holy Courage greatsword. The 3 sharp arrows were about to be destroyed after a flash of the sword light. But the great emperor did not expect that Queen Sylvanas would use her left hand, which was holding the bow, to draw 3 extremely thin lines of lightning from her fingers, and actually pull the 3 arrows away from their predetermined trajectories. After the arrows changed direction in the air, they once again stabbed at Vecnalas, the emperor of the Kiraj Empire. Vecnalas was finally a little surprised. He did not expect that the arrows that were shot would have a second attack, especially when the arrows should have been cut down. But he still did not care. He was immune to magic, and the most powerful lightning power on the arrows was ineffective against him. Although the arrows would hit him, they might not be able to hit his vitals. If they hit his armor, it wouldn't matter. Secondly, the arrows were too small and lacked attack power. At this moment, Queen Sylvanas, in the midst of a high-speed dash, opened her left hand angrily again. The 3 arrows, which had already slowed down, suddenly sped up twice in an unscientific way. 2 arrows were shot at his eyes, and 1 was shot at his throat. Vecnalas had no choice but to stop and use his left hand, which was wearing armor, to protect his vital parts with a backhand slap, and at the same time, hit the 3 arrows away. And Queen Sylvanas had already taken this opportunity to shoot 3 rounds of arrows, a total of 9 arrows. She manipulated the current of the lightning, and easily let the arrows that flew out get a better angle of entry. For a moment, the arrows all drew beautiful arcs in the air, and hit the target that she wanted to shoot. Armpits, elbows, knees, ankles. Although these were protected by armor, they were still vulnerable parts with gaps, and were the targets that Queen Sylvanas wanted to hit. Years of fighting against giant-like creatures had made her give up the fantasy of killing with 1 shot. Instead, she used a more practical method, which was to paralyze the opponent as much as possible, or to weaken the opponent's movement. When all 9 arrows hit, and she felt that Vecnalas's movement speed had obviously slowed down, Queen Sylvanas could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. This kind of magical second or even third stage control, Queen Sylvanas only had a success rate of more than 50% in practice. All 9 arrows hit the target. It was almost a stroke of genius, and even she did not think that she could actually succeed. But if she had to use a word to describe her mood at this moment, it was simply cool. The battle was just the beginning. The next moment, the huge Emperor Keela sword had already slashed down. Queen Sylvanas made a flexible twisting movement while moving forward at high speed, and narrowly dodged the sword. At the same time, while quickly dodging to the left, she shot another 3 arrows, one of which hit the Emperor's neck, but it was obvious that it was a muscle. For Vecnalas's thick neck, which was so thick that at least 2 people would need to wrap their arms around it, the bowl-sized wound on the neck muscle was not considered serious. Chapter 13:19. The Emperor suddenly used brute force to change the direction of the giant sword, and swept it horizontally. Queen Sylvanas made an extremely exaggerated backward movement, her body above her knees almost parallel to the ground, and narrowly dodged another attack. She then made 3 backflips in a row before stopping the powerful momentum. During the backflips, she shot 9 more arrows. At this time, Duque was fiercely attacking the demon Emperor Warlord. In the image transmission of the magic eyes, Duque saw that Queen Sylvanas almost had the carvings at the front of her breastplate cut off by the Sword Emperor's greatsword. Duque's face turned green. Did she really think that there would be 1 less benefit from now on? Ba. Even if Queen Sylvanas became an undead like in history, Duque would still like her. It couldn't be helped that Queen Sylvanas danced on the edge of the sword. Her greatest weapon was evasion. If she didn't appear, then Duque would have to use the mirror reality to pull the Sword Emperor. That was also a very dangerous choice. Since she was here, Duque had to believe in her. That's right, Queen Sylvanas was definitely delicate and weak compared to the 7-story Sword Emperor Warlord. She would die if she was hit by a sword. On the other hand, as long as she was focused enough and didn't get hit by a single move, it would be her victory. She alone, of course, would never be able to kill the twin emperors. Note that the lives of the twin emperors were shared. Her bow and arrows couldn't hurt them, but Duque could. After confirming once again that there wouldn't be a second existence besides him that could attract the attention of the demon Emperor Warlord, Duque went all out. The thin lines of the elemental laws crisscrossed back and forth. The 2 demigods, with their deepest understanding of elemental magic, performed a gorgeous epic duel. It was a battle of great momentum. Behind Duque, the entire sky was inverted. Countless arcane missiles poured down like a meteor shower, drawing countless dazzling parallel lines and bombarding the Demon Emperor. Not only that, but the weave was also expanding greedily, like the beating of a heart. Every time it contracted and expanded, the area of the weave could be seen to increase. Every time the area of the weave expanded, the power of the spells blasting out of the weave would increase by 10%. Vec Lor's eyes narrowed. He raised his imperial courage staff high, and a huge screen of light as black as ink rose behind him, enveloping the entire hall. Shadow energy floated on the screen like grease, emitting an evil and decaying aura. At the same time, he extended his withered left claw and pointed at Duque. Countless black spiritual energy beams shot toward Duque's arcane missiles. The Demon King, Emperor Vec Lor, was also a super expert who was proficient in many types of magic. The arcane magic, wide area magic burst technique, was also one of his specialties. However, after the spellcasters entered the demigod realm, the way they fought would naturally change drastically. Just like how it was impossible to burn Ragnaros to death with fire, Vec Lor similarly could not use arcane magic to kill a demigod whose core was arcane magic, even if it was a newly advanced demigod. With a thought, the countless beetles on the ground began to approach Duque, intentionally or unintentionally. Duque sneered. Self-destructing bug? Can't you be a little more creative? In his previous life as a player, he obviously did not have the ability to deal with beetles that would constantly respawn and never finish killing. In this life, as a true demigod of Azeroth, he had plenty of ways to deal with the Demon King. As expected, a bug that was originally only the size of a palm suddenly grew rapidly under Vec Lor's infusion of magic. In the blink of an eye, it became a giant the size of a carriage. Bang! The bug exploded. What splashed out was not flames like in history, but extremely corrosive acid. Duque revealed a playful smile. Duque did not need to do anything. In the weave, dozens of burly figures wrapped in raging flames rushed out. Fire demon guards, Manager Majordomo Executus thugs and meat shields. Now that Majordomo Executus had become Duque's elemental emissary, and was in charge of managing the weave, his underlings naturally became part of the weave. In the molten core, the fire demon guards were more like pure, strong warriors, but here, they were more like Balrogs from the scorching hell. However, their skin was still crimson, not golden red like the Balrogs. They were also covered in blazing flames, looking quite formidable. To be honest, Duque did not have much hope in the combat power of these fire demon guards. Since the Demon King was harassing him with cannon fodder, he could not focus on dealing with them. All the command was handed over to Majordomo Executus, who had integrated with the weave. However, after the fire demon guards became purer elemental creatures, they were really powerful. They could actually drive all the bugs, big or small, out of a radius of 30 meters around Duque. Humph! Vec Lor looked unhappy. Suddenly, those big beetles were no longer simple self-destructing bugs. They became the size of rhinoceroses, and their bodies emitted pink crystal light. Dozens of crystal beetles rushed up and fought evenly with the fire demon guards. Oh! With a thought from Duque, a modified version of the fire elemental jumped out of the illusory weave. On the surface, this was a fire elemental bathed in fire. However, there was a huge change in body shape. It was the Balrog from the Lord of the Rings world, where the White Sword Saint Gandalf was. With the appearance of a demon, the Balrog was good at using whips and beheading swords. Roar! This Balrog, which did not exist in the world of Azeroth, stabbed the flaming sword in its right hand into the ground as soon as it appeared. With this action, brilliant flames suddenly rose from the void, followed by magma pouring out of the void on the spot. 1-2. Many golden rivers hung upside down in the void, lighting up the entire Twin Emperor's Hall, spreading along the golden beam of light. Even the ground began to turn into a state of melting magma. Every crystal beetle that was touched immediately emitted a zzz sound, which made one's hair stand on end when they heard it. The defenses of these crystal beetles that were specialized by Vec Lor were extremely frightening. A single pillar of lava fire couldn't even melt their outer shells, but as 2, 3, and even more pillars of lava fire condensed into lava spears, the high temperature and sharpness combined into one body, the only outcome for these sturdy monsters was to shriek as they turned into a pile of charcoal. The golden light of the fire illuminated the face of Emperor Warlord. He finally realized how difficult it was to deal with the newly promoted demigod standing in front of him. In terms of the total amount and quality of magic, Duque was not inferior to him, a veteran demigod. In terms of multicasting and the strength of his generals, he was also superior. In Duque's weave, more kinds of attack magic began to emerge, breaking through the obstruction of the shadow arrow rain and hitting the magic shield of the demon emperor. Chapter 1320. The Demon King waved the Courage Imperial staff as his mind worked rapidly, thinking about the situation. The situation was clear now. His brother, Vecnolas, had the absolute advantage against Sylvanas, and was constantly pressuring him. On the other side, in the elemental domain, he was severely restricted by Duque, who specialized in 3 elements and had decent strength in the other 3. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before he was defeated. The current situation was a bit like in Ouroboros. The snake head at the back wanted to devour the snake tail at the front, and whoever devoured it faster would be the winner. Was it Vecnolas who killed Sylvanas first? Or would Duque exhaust them by attacking him first? In the end, he made a decision. It was a cruel order. Hundreds of insects grew in size at once. They had all sorts of characteristics. Some were filled with fire elements, some were frost, and some were acid. These insects ignored the attacks of the fire demon guards and Balrogs, and charged at Duque, who was standing in the air on an arcane throne of energy. Unexpectedly, even though the formation had been penetrated, not a single fire demon guard left the front line. They even ignored the pursuit and continued to attack the beetles within their attack range. In the weave, a new elemental creation appeared. This time, it was a giant surrounded by thunder and lightning. In the name of Thaddeus, I declare that no existence can surpass me and attack my master. This thunder giant, who had the appearance of a holy knight, snapped his fingers, and a large number of beetles that had charged through the line of defense suddenly jumped out of nowhere. After a series of thunderous explosions, the entire world became quiet. Vecnolas didn't even frown, and directly let more beetles burrow out of the cracks in the ground. They kept charging, growing larger, and pounced at the continuous line of fire and thunder. It was hard to say if this scene was tragic or cruel. These creatures, born in the darkness and raised as weapons, were like moths at this moment, rushing wave after wave towards the impenetrable line of defense. Their lives seemed cheap and pitiful, but as long as they could successfully obstruct Duque's casting for a moment, in the eyes of the twin emperors, their lives had meaning. Vecnolas began to cast a spell. It was a spell completely different from attack magic. Teleportation. If there were no accidents, the twin emperors would immediately swap the 2 brothers. The sword emperor, who was immune to magic, would come to Duque, while the demon emperor, who was immune to physical attacks, would go against Sylvanas. Duque snorted coldly, and a fireball the size of a small sentry tower smashed into Warlord's body. The flames instantly burned through the demon emperor's left shoulder armor. Not only the armor, but almost half of his left shoulder was burned to ashes. However, he didn't seem to be in pain. He just smiled as if he was announcing his victory. In Duque's spirit sea, the Demon King transmitted this message. Master said that only existences that are allowed to teleport in his sacred land can exist. Duque shuddered. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to. Stepping into a true god's territory was like stepping into their domain. See Thun's berserk divine power wantonly spread throughout the entire Courage temple. Expanding the magic net for Duque was a very, very strenuous task. It was obviously a thankless task. Duque had to do this, or else he would be cut off from all power in the outside world. As a newly ascended demigod, Duque's own divine power reserves and magic reserves were definitely the lowest. He had just constructed the prototype of the magic net when he was forced to join the battle. If his source of magic and the support of the magic net were blocked, then Duque wouldn't be much different from an ordinary Breaking Dawn archmage. At most, he would just be a little tougher. Fortunately, Duque grasped too many types of elements. Even Si Thun couldn't expel all 6 of Duque's major elements. This was like patching. If it was 1 or 2 holes, it would be easy to patch, but if it was a wicker basket full of holes, then what the hell was there to patch? So no matter how hard Si Thun tried to suppress him, Duque still expanded his magic net bit by bit, whether it was the total amount of magic or the volume of the magic net itself. But Si Thun could completely mess up the spatial coordinates of the temple. At this moment, Duque couldn't feel any clear spatial coordinates. The next moment, Emperor Warlord was about to switch places with his brother. At this moment, Duque didn't even bother to show the slightest bit of nervousness on his face. It was just that his left hand was still tightly gripping the divine artifact magic staff, a tiche, which was somewhat famous even among the Courage insect people. "You're just bluffing." Warlord snorted disdainfully. He had already thought about how he was going to torture that jumping female elf after the teleportation. The surrounding images suddenly blurred. This was the inevitable situation of teleportation. But a second later, the Nephilim King was stunned. Duque hadn't been left behind by him at all. Duque had completed a successful teleportation just like him. This wasn't a simple thing. After Si Thun had mixed up almost all the spatial coordinates here, any teleportation or flash was an extremely high-risk gamble. If he wasn't careful, he would get stuck in the pillars of the temple, or even in some unknown spatial rift, and be done for. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Ah!" He never dreamed that Duque would be so decisive. What he really couldn't understand was how Duque had located the spatial coordinates. Duke smiled, and with a flying kick he kicked the dumbfounded Queen Shi's buttocks. The surging arcane elemental energy sent Queen Zeline flying towards Sword Emperor Vecnoth, who was 100 meters away. "Duque, you bastard." Queen Sylvanas was a little exasperated. Duque clearly had a better way, but he chose to do this. Was this humiliation? Or was it flirting? Regardless of that, the Sword Emperor's sword light fell again, and Queen Sylvanas had to focus on dodging and counterattacking again. On this side, the Nephilim King only got a contemptuous smile from Duque. "My flames are my lighthouse in the void." In response to Duke's words, Warlord's charred left shoulder, which had already been completely extinguished, once again ignited with a blazing red flame. The raging flame surged incessantly along his arm, spreading to his left elbow and the left side of his neck in an instant. He had underestimated his enemy. He didn't think that Duque's manipulation of the elements was so high. In his impression, that should be the means of the Fire Demon King, Ragnaros, who knew that Duque could be like a phoenix, giving birth to flames from ashes again, burning the enemy's body a second time, and once again turning it into an accelerant for the rolling flames. Vecnolaz's expression finally changed, and he felt anxious. Chapter 13:21. They were both demigods, but the gap was so huge. Duque was clearly just a newly minted demigod, but his proficiency in using power was above him. Although their domains were different, and strictly speaking, Duque was a demigod mage for humans and elves, while Warlord was a demigod mage for the Courage insect people. There should not be such a gap. Warlord could not help but look at the seemingly inconspicuous wooden staff in Duque's hand. An extremely rare space-type magic staff? For a new demigod to have such wealth, even Warlord was secretly envious of him. "Fine. After I kill you, your staff will be my spoils of war." The Courage insect people were the model race of the strong preying on the weak. At this moment, Warlord looked at Duque with a bit more greed and jealousy. Warlord exploded all the shadow elements he had accumulated in one breath, and the dark shadow elements easily extinguished the flames on his body. "Yo. What? Want to call your brother over?" Duque teased the Demon King. "We don't need both of us to deal with you." Warlord's face turned cold. To be honest, the twin emperors attacking together was a bit troublesome. They would heal themselves at every turn, and Duque was not sure if he could successfully use counterspell on the twin emperors. Duque had his own confidence. Glancing at the needle on the gadget in his hand, Duque laughed in his heart, and began to focus most of his attention on Queen Sylvanas. Queen Sylvanas worked very hard. It was rare that after fighting for so long, Her rhythm was not messed up at all. Every time he dodged, it was just right. He didn't spend too much energy, and every time he dodged, even if it was just 1 millimeter, she would never let herself be in the dangerous splash range. At the same time, she would never let herself expend too much energy. This kind of exquisite, almost scalpel-level movements could only be done by someone who used her agility to the extreme. Among the 4 Windrunner sisters, if there was one who had the best chance of breaking through to the level of demigod, it would definitely be Sylvanas. Lilith's talent was too poor. Reaching the hero domain was already her limit. Sasha was very talented, but it was a pity that she was too kind. In terms of talent, Aurelia was on the same level as Queen Sylvia. The problem was that she often considered too much when faced with problems. She cared too much about the big picture, and this weakness limited her on the path of battle. Only Sylvanas, with her unyielding spirit, successfully acted out what it meant to be a rebel of fate. He was unwilling to be left behind. She was not willing to be a good wife and mother. She was not willing to be a country's mascot, a vase in a duke's mansion. It was because of so much unwillingness that she became who she was now. In order to break through to the demigod realm, other than Duque, who had the help of the system elf to cheat, or Medivh, who was a freak with extraordinary talents, the best whetstone was to fight a real demigod in a battle of life and death. Although it was dangerous, under such circumstances, breaking through was the fastest and most likely. Now it seemed that Queen She had done a good job. But Vekler wasn't good. His magic was suppressed by Duque, and this was when Duque was clearly distracted. Logically speaking, any distraction or carelessness during a battle with Pharaoh would be fatal. This was because it could affect the elemental guidance or the arrangement of incantations, and could even destroy a forbidden spell, blowing himself up before killing the enemy. But Duque was a weirdo. With his mind on his sister, his left hand held a tiche and continued to guide the elemental guidance, while his right hand made the casting gestures without the slightest bit of confusion. Even more shamelessly, he pulled out more things from the magic net. A replica of the Curator, made entirely of arcane elements, appeared. With the earth as armor and pure arcane energy as his body, this Curator used a continuous rain of arcane missiles to clear a large wave of beetles as soon as he appeared. It wasn't just him. There was also a smaller frost dragon made of the purest frost elements. It appeared out of thin air, facing the Demon King's shadow arrow rain head-on, and opened its mouth to spit out an ultra-pure frost dragon breath. The benefits of Duque's split control were vividly displayed at this moment. As long as he could still connect to the magic net, the 6 elemental emissaries could command various elemental creatures from a safe place to attack Duque's enemies through the magic net. On the contrary, the Demon King Vekler could only rely on himself. Damn! After a furious roar, the Demon King changed tactics. Those large-sized beetles no longer blindly rushed to their deaths. More and more beetles began to climb onto his huge, but seemingly skinny body. Duque narrowed his eyes. There was an indescribable feeling in them. As expected, a change had come. Although he didn't know how they got their human forms, Duque could be sure that, at least in this world of Azeroth, the twin emperors were the emperors of the Karaji insect people empire. The emperor of the insects, of course, wouldn't be human. So the twin emperors were also insects. All the little insects not only worshipped their emperors, but were also willing to give up their lives. The insects that turned pink were crystallized. They greatly increased the hardness of their bodies. The ones that turned white were ice elemental, yellow were fire elemental, and violet were arcane elemental. Duque had never imagined that Vekler could use such a miraculous method to forcefully increase his physical defense and elemental absorption ability. Originally, in terms of communication with the elemental realm, Duque was far ahead of Vekler. Now the Demon King had obviously pulled this gap to a point where it wasn't too great. As a price, Vekler's body was already huge enough. After thousands of insects climbed up, his body grew even taller, becoming as tall as a 10-story building. Queen Sylvanas naturally noticed the changes here. She only glanced over, and her whole body quivered. That's right. Thousands of wriggling insects were climbing up, even biting and devouring each other. This scene, this sound, was challenging the limits of a woman's senses. Queen Sylvanas didn't have the luxury to pay attention to the Demon King, and she firmly believed that Duque could handle it better than her. On the other side, looking at Vekler, the Demon King, turning himself into a fortress-like existence, Duque was a little dumbfounded. Bastard. You're forcing me to use my ultimate move. I originally wanted to leave it for your master. Duque seemed to say this without rhyme or reason. At first, the Demon King was very nervous. Who knew that a minute had passed, 2 minutes had passed, 5 minutes had passed. Even after the Gemini swapped positions 10 times, nothing happened. Duque took advantage of his elemental purity and continued to attack like a tidal wave, killing Vekler's insects wave after wave. However, Vekler used the insects' lives to fill in the gaps, using insect lives to buy time, and fighting evenly with Duque. Chapter 1322. Just as Emperor Vekler was praying for his brother to kill Sylvanas first, suddenly, the entire Ahn'Qiraj temple shook violently. It was like an earthquake. The feeling of the earth shaking even affected this 1,000-meter deep underground cave. How exaggerated was this? Unfortunately, all the Qiraj insect people were no strangers to this feeling, because it wasn't the first time. The last time it was so shocking was when Naxxramas crashed into the east side of the Ahn'Qiraj temple. It fell back and forth, or rather, it was repeatedly thrusted, turning that side into ruins. Could it be that the Alliance threw Naxxramas in again this time? Impossible. The twin emperors exclaimed at the same time. Their master Thun would never let Naxxramas behave atrociously in his territory again. In fact, Naxxramas was really close to the Ahn'Qiraj temple again. This time was different from the past. This time, the floating fortress was purely a feint. Seeing that his old enemy was coming again, how could Thun keep his face? Without saying a word, he first used a moving death ray. Different from the time of Kel Thuzad, under Duque's orders, the dwarven craftsmen carried out emergency modifications to Naxxramas. The biggest difference was the addition of a set of 12 large screw engines. Although this thing didn't have much effect on accelerating the entire fortress, at a critical moment, a difference of 1 meter was the difference between life and death. Moreover, the main control system of the fortress was linked to the magic net. After the warning system detected the high energy reaction rising from the Ahn'Qiraj temple in advance, Duque directly calculated the shooting range of Thun's light cannon, and let the fortress evade in advance. Just like this, Naxxramas narrowly avoided Thun's ultimate move, and the feint attack was to cover for another starfall. He didn't believe that Thun could fire such a terrifying light cannon continuously. Under Duque's instigation, the dragons brought down another abandoned giant ship of the Burning Legion as a meteorite. In the dark starry sky, a red line of fire stabbed down diagonally. The clouds were boiling like porridge. From afar, it looked like a huge marshmallow cloud. Suddenly, a red dot appeared in the middle, like a stone falling into water, rippling on the clouds. Then, the clouds were dyed fiery red. The next moment, under Tyron's guidance, the fiery red warship fell to the ground. It accurately hit the place where the entrance of the Ahn'Qiraj shrine should have been. If the first collapse that trapped the Alliance hero group was deliberately done by the twin emperors, then the bombing this time was Duque taking advantage of the situation. The opening, which was not very big in the first place, was forcibly torn open in the direction of the palace where the twin emperors were. The earth was collapsing, and the hard rocks were easily torn apart. Countless rocks fell from the shocking crack at the entrance of the temple, once again setting off a terrifying man-made earthquake. After the violent collapse, Vekler suddenly discovered that he could see the sky. Originally, the entire palace was a typical underground cave. Now that the entire dome had collapsed, they could naturally see the sky. At this moment, Vekler, who was observing the skies, saw a resplendent golden light shine in the skies above. Normally, if it wasn't noon, there wouldn't be any sunlight that could reach the bottom of the deep cave. This light was obviously man-made. Even if Vekler died, he wouldn't know that at this moment, in the orbit of the planet above Ahn'Qiraj, there was a reflector made from a crystal mirror that was about 2 kilometers long and wide. This was naturally a product of black technology that Duque had asked the dragons to do. Sunlight itself didn't have any direct destructive power, But with the help of Alonso's Fails magic net, and the processing of forbidden spells, sunlight had become the most terrifying weapon of mass destruction. An incomparably thick golden pillar of light descended from above the clouds, piercing through the entire world. The clouds had long been swept away by the meteorite, but now, under the influence of the holy magic, they slowly rotated to form a whirlpool. The golden pillar stabbed downwards, landing straight into that gigantic crack. The resplendent golden light reflected in Duque's dark eyes fell along the walls of the cave. With a confident smile, the golden light penetrated deep into the ground, and began to converge at the end, focusing on the body of a certain emperor, whose body had become even larger. Asterisk boom. Asterisk continuous golden light spread from Weak, Lore's raised head to every corner of his body. Every bug that possessed Emperor Weak, Lore's body seemed to swell up, before exploding. This time, it wasn't because they were obeying the Emperor's orders, but because the elements on their bodies were in conflict with it. That's right, in order to avoid Duque's edge, Weak, Lore had chosen to use the shadow element as his core, suddenly receiving the strongest attack of the holy element. Not a single beetle could withstand the tearing of these two opposing forces. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, and more tentacles, mouth parts, shells and thorny limbs exploded into the air. As the golden light spread further, it was like a sharp knife cutting open a wrapping paper. Immediately, the true body of the demon Emperor Weak, Lore was revealed to Duque and Queen Sylvanas. The once arrogant and skinny Weak, Lore had lost his humanoid appearance. What appeared before Duque was an extremely ugly, twisted bug. Overall, he looked a little like a silkworm, with countless sharp, thin and stubby little legs. But a closer look would reveal that each of his legs was a beetle's mouthpart, and each spot on his body was a living beetle's eyeball. Emperor Weak, Lore was more like a monster made of countless bugs intertwining with each other. Fortunately, in less than half a second after Weak, Lore's glory was revealed, Alonso's soul directly descended beside Duque. His full strength caused this disgusting scene to become extremely brief. Amidst an earth-shattering, inhuman scream, that giant bug amalgamation suddenly exploded. Every single tentacle, every single horn, and every single hair that was like steel needles completely exploded apart and transformed into specks of powder that were the size of ordinary ants. In the end, they didn't even have the time to flutter down before they had already dispersed within the golden radiance. On the other side, the Sword Emperor Vecnala's triple slash had almost forced Sylvanas into a dead end. At this moment, the Sword Emperor's huge body suddenly shrunk rapidly. In a short 3 seconds, he had become an empty bag of skin, collapsing on the ground. In the surroundings, all of the bugs wandering about on the ground died. They exploded one after another, as if a rain of blood had fallen. Sylvanas turned his head and saw Duque standing proudly within the golden light. His expression was normal, and his black pupils were accompanied by a light smile. It was as if what he had just killed were not 2 demigods, but 2 ants. Chapter 13:23. He died just like that? Queen Sylvanas' face was still frozen in disbelief. Did we win? Duque smiled as he walked over and hooked Queen Sylvanas' little nose. In order to fight against my elemental advantage, Lore almost changed the attributes of his entire body to shadow. He was gambling on the fact that there was no strong direct sunlight in this dark underground palace. Obviously, he bet on the wrong bet. Queen Sylvanas was stunned for a moment before a bright smile blossomed on her face. You master tacticians are all despicable. Duque was speechless. In history, Queen Sylvanas was a ruthless person who had no choice but to max out her talent in scheming. It was fine to be mocked by anyone but Queen Sylvanas. Duque was a little displeased. Wasn't this the same as a certain master tactician mocking others? You guys are all dirty. I'm not going to take the blame for this. Alright. I'm just a little regretful. My great hero, you can't be so petty. As she spoke, 2 fair arms had already wrapped around him. On her perfect smiling face, her long and curly eyelashes had already drooped. With such benefits, all of Duque's complaints disappeared. He decisively went up to taste Queen Sylvanas' little tongue. After an unknown period of time, The two of them were awakened by the sound of footsteps from afar. You guys are having fun. There were still beads of sweat on Aurelia's temples as she rushed over. Evidently, she had rushed over after fighting the family of three. Of course, as the eldest sister of the Fengxing family, she would only pretend to be angry when she saw this scene. Behind Aurelia were the other members of the hero team. No one would blame Duque for not coming over to help after the fight. Duque had already fought the strongest enemy. If they couldn't even deal with an ordinary leader, they wouldn't be qualified to stay in the hero team. The battle on William's side was the last to end, and it was rather pathetic. Many of them had sustained injuries that were neither light nor heavy. What made him feel even worse was that Onyxia had actually run over to ask if he needed help after getting rid of Princess Huhuran. On the surface, she seemed to be well-intentioned, but from the tone of the Princess of the Black Dragon's teasing tone, it was clear that she would help as long as William asked. However, it was unknown if she would say something behind his back. William didn't reply immediately. Instead, he asked about everyone's situation. When he found out that his group was the last to fight, he made an interesting choice. He wanted Onyxia to hold the line, but he wanted the members in the cave to rely on their own strength to finish off the tenacious Fancaris. Looking at the battered William and the rest walking towards him, Duque nodded slightly. William took the initiative and said, "I'm sorry, it seems like I made the wrong choice. Because of my decision, the Alliance's hero team was nearly wiped out." Duque shook his head. "No, there is no right choice in this world. The so-called correctness was just a theory of results. In that chaotic situation, since Magni wasn't around, and you took over the command and made the choice, you are a qualified leader. Actually, I'm quite curious. Why didn't you accept Onyxia's help just now?" William had a strange expression on his face. "If the situation was dire, I would. Even if she was said to be a sinister black dragon who would betray us at any time." Onyxia snorted coldly behind Duque. "If it was her master or someone else, I wouldn't be at ease with her. Since it was Uncle Duque, the savior of Stormwind, I definitely approve of your decision. Moreover, the situation was already stable at that time, so I would rather let everyone have a better experience." "A wise choice," Duque praised sincerely. "You're starting to become an outstanding leader." William nodded humbly. "Thank you, Uncle Duque. Actually, I would like to consult you, who is known as the greatest strategist in the history of the Alliance. What's a better way to break the other party's conspiracy?" As an elder, Duque explained to William in detail, when the other party has obviously set up a trap, as a leader, the first thing to do is to make a decisive decision. Being overcautious and not doing anything is the worst. As long as you make a decision, even if it's a wrong decision, it's better than doing nothing and letting the team follow the other party's ideas and let the situation develop. Duque continued, "Be it strategy or tactics, they are all psychological games. There was no such thing as an absolute mental model. If you have a deeper understanding of the enemy, but the enemy doesn't know anything about you, then you've already won half of the battle." "Then, Uncle Duque, why are you always able to use all kinds of exaggerated methods to deal with the enemy?" "That's because I'm a transmigrator." Cough cough. Duke lectured with a straight face. "I have always used strange ideas to defeat my enemies, because I have jumped out of the enemy's way of thinking. At the same time, I have a broader vision than the enemy. That's why I can always win. I've never been the most outstanding one. I'm only a little better than the enemy. I also know that what I lack the most is experience, but since my subjects have high expectations of me, I want to avoid detours as much as possible. Do you have any good ideas or good guidelines?" "You don't say, there really is. I found this rather interesting book on the art of war in Mediva's library. I'll give it to you today. I hope you can read it and read it thoroughly." With that, the sage-like Dumuk solemnly took out an ancient book that had been specially dyed yellow with soy sauce, washed and dried. "What book is this?" William's eyes widened. Under the watchful eyes of Valilla and Brawl, he caressed the cover and slowly opened the first page. He looked at the strange square words and was extremely confused. "Oh, I forgot that you don't know any languages other than the common language and Darnassus. For this day, I've prepared my translation for you. Duque took out a newly written translation in the common language. Sun Tzu's Art of War. How to get more grandchildren. First, you have to find 100 beauties who are willing to have children with you. Give birth to 1,000 children, and then... Before William could finish reading, Duque snatched the book back at lightning speed. You're mistaken, this is the book. Duque took out another translation of Sun Tzu's Art of War. He could clearly feel more than 10 shy and angry gazes from all around him. War is a matter of great importance to a country. It's the land of life and death, the path of survival. It must be examined. Although it was a little hard to understand after William read it out, it was more than 100 times more pretentious in an instant. Chapter 1324. Sun Tzu's Art of War was a top-notch work that revealed the laws of competition. It displayed novel concepts that had never been seen in the world of Azeroth. When a series of profound strategic concepts such as using intelligence to conquer strength, using softness to conquer strength, and winning without fighting were displayed, William was quickly engrossed in it. At the same time, the profound philosophical concepts of using virtue to subdue people and the unity of man and nature made William even more mesmerized. Before Duque traveled to this world, the influence of this masterpiece had far exceeded the borders of the country. Many famous foreign strategists were intoxicated by the broad and profound traditional strategic culture of China. Not only did this masterpiece transcend national boundaries, but it also transcended time and space. As British Air Marshal John Slessor said in China's military maxim, "What's fascinating about Sun Tzu is how amazingly up-to-date his ideas are." By changing some of the words slightly, his maxim seems to have been written yesterday. This masterpiece was no longer simply a work of war. It had become a must-read for leaders in the fields of politics, economics, and diplomacy. Sun Tzu's ideas were not only widely used in the modern military field, but also in politics, economics, diplomacy, and sports. For such a godly book, which had been explained in detail by Duque in the common language, William was almost instantly sure that this was the legendary Holy Bible. Looking at this Holy Bible, William's slight disappointment from making the wrong choice was immediately swept away. His eyes contained a brighter light than before, as if there was a raging flame burning in them. Unknowingly, Magni had also come over, and even the other kings had come over to watch. It was only when Duque slapped William and Magni's shoulders that they snapped out of it. "All right. Sithun is not dead yet. Let's retreat first." If it was in the past, William would have asked Duque why they didn't just kill him in one go. However, the concepts of retreating in order to advance that he had just seen had strongly stimulated William's thoughts. The higher-ups of the alliance quickly reached a consensus to retreat first. Since they were allied forces, challenging the ancient god Sithun was a huge matter. They would definitely go through thick and thin together. Even with a demigod like Duque overseeing things, there was still no guarantee. After all, no one knew to what extent Sithun's strength had recovered, but from the two attacks Sithun made, one of which sent Naxxramas flying and the other of which blew up a small part of Naxxramas, it was clear that the power of this ancient evil god was not complete. Of course, the alliance could directly charge into the lowest level of the Ahn'Qiraj temple without waiting for the tribes. He might even be able to take advantage of Sithun before he fully recovered. But so what if he won? They might be able to obtain some decent equipment, but who could guarantee that the alliance's experts wouldn't die? It was precisely because the alliance was stronger than the Horde in terms of both quantity and quality of experts, as well as national and military power, that the alliance was able to form an allied army. If the alliance sacrificed too much, it would only benefit the Horde. William suddenly understood why Duque wanted to retreat first. Duque smiled and turned to Jaina. "Go out and inform the vanguard of the allied army to retreat immediately from the Wall of Beetles to the Divine Temple. At the same time, prepare to use continuous artillery fire 24 hours a day to cover the road from the Wall of Beetles to the Ahn'Qiraj ruins." Almost as soon as the Alliance heroes returned to Naxxramas, the most terrifying insect swarm on record broke out in the Ahn'Qiraj temple. Damn it! It's here again. On the floating fortress, all kinds of chaotic sounds drowned out everything. the sound of orders, angry curses, and then the loudest sound of artillery fire rang out. No one could figure out whether the sound of the artillery had alarmed the swarm, or whether the swarm had attracted the artillery fire. Almost at the same time as the artillery shells rained down on the Ankh-Kraj temple, insects the size of small trucks rushed out from every corner of the temple with their fangs and claws bared. They were like a black carpet that covered the entire ground, dyeing the yellow earth into a creepy, constantly shaking black color. They rushed out of the temple and formed a huge wall that was like a wave. They rushed forward crazily and quickly, even ignoring the cries of their companions. They stepped on their companions that ran slower to the bottom. Whether or not they would be trampled to death, no one knew. Originally, Varrock Salyafar didn't want to retreat because retreating meant that the Horde heroes led by Sal would be cut off. However, Duke's words dispelled his thoughts. Varrock, I don't doubt your loyalty to the chief at all, but it's not like you haven't seen an insect swarm before. How long do you think your army can last in front of this tide? Do you want to kill the last elites of the Horde? And as long as we kill all the insects, we can still get Sal and the others back. Don't worry, as long as Sithun isn't beaten back to the depths of the planet, the interests of the Alliance and the Horde will be the same. Varrock was silent for a few seconds and finally nodded. The Horde retreated. The Alliance, with the convenience of Naxxramas, crazily opened fire on every isle in the direction of the Ankh-Kraj temple. Every place that wasn't under the protection of Sithun's power. The insects were charging without any regard for their own lives, and the Alliance's artillery was also covering the area. The swarm of insects that was originally like a surging black tide didn't even have time to form an interweaving turbulence before it was smashed to pieces by the Alliance's superior artillery. The entire world seemed to be filled with the light of the explosions. As the Cannon King of the Alliance, Bulang Bronzebeard methodically commanded Naxxramas. For ground attacks, prioritize the incendiary bombs, then the explosive bombs. For air attacks, don't stop the 3 types of bombs. Don't be afraid to run out of bombs. Sir Duke Marcus is already a demigod for mages. He will open a portal for us to replenish our ammunition. In the command center, after letting Khadgar help with the matter of the portal, Duke's focus fell on another place. He said to Varrock and Magni, see? The range of Sithun's power shield has shrunk. Yes. The two nodded at the same time. Originally, Sithun could cover the entire Ankh-Kraj temple, but now it only covered the main hall of the temple. Other places, even if stray bullets flew over, it didn't matter. Why is that? Varrock was puzzled. Because our Alliance's hero squad first broke the pillar of the Ankh-Kraj temple. Duke raised his palm, and 2 souls that looked like little people appeared on his palm. Even though these 2 souls had been imprisoned by Duke, Varrock could still clearly feel the strong will and surging soul waves from these 2 souls. This is the souls of the twin emperors, the emperor of the Kraj insect people, and also the leader of the swarm. After losing them, Sithun could no longer control the Kraj insect people well, so he simply sent all the low-level insects to their deaths. Chapter 1325. To be honest, even Duke wasn't sure if the Kraj insect people were Sithun's biological sons. After all, in terms of race, they wouldn't even be able to pee in the same pot. The most common explanation was that when the Titans discovered Azeroth, the entire surface of the planet was about to be corrupted by the 4 ancient gods. The Titans were furious. After the boss of the Pantheon, Amonthel, personally destroyed the most powerful Yashaji, the Titans discovered that the ancient gods had already corroded the planet deeply. Killing the ancient gods would cause great damage to Azeroth. For the sake of Azeroth, a powerful Titan in the future, they created guardians and sent them to seal the ancient gods in Azeroth. However, these ancient gods didn't obediently give in. They were still hatching plans in the underground of Azeroth, ready to rule the world again at any time. Sithun was defeated and sealed in a battle in Silithus. However, with the loss and confusion of the Guardian Lydin, as well as the earth-shattering explosion and impact of the Well of Eternity, the Guardian's seal gradually weakened. He reappeared as the mastermind behind the Kraj insect people. However, in all historical documents, Only the Courage insect people were mentioned as Si-Thun's servants. According to Si-Thun's crazy personality, since he wanted to stall for time to recover from his injuries, servants were probably existences that could be abandoned at any time. At this thought, Duque had a new idea. Bulang, when this wave of insects is over, use the zero cannonball. Okay. Bulang replied. Zero cannonball? William was curious. There are many plants in this world that are more or less poisonous to insects. The most widely used ones are pyrethrum, rhotina, and tobacco. The so-called zero cannonball is to cultivate a large number of these plants, grind them into powder, and then shoot them near the insect nest. As for how effective it is, it will have to be tested to know. Anyway, there are a lot of materials in the Ungoro crater in the east. Duque replied indifferently. It didn't matter if there was no effect. If there was a special effect in the test, it would be worth it. Although Si-Thun didn't care about the insects, the Alliance and the Horde did. Even if they killed Si-Thun, there might be another insect wave, and the whole of Kalimdor would have to kneel. It was not possible to form such a magnificent coalition army every time. As a transmigrator, Duque knew that Azeroth was full of trouble. William nodded heavily. I've learned a lot. After settling the chores, Duque came to the strange little space attached to Naxxramas. This place, which used to be the Frost Dragon's lair and the Temple of Kel-Thuzad, had now become the core area of the stronghold. Unlike the main control area, this core area was mainly used to store valuables and serve as a refuge for VIPs. Thanks to the promotion of mold-based house construction, while the logistics force was busy transforming Naxxramas' defense and firepower, Du had the time to recruit a group of Storm City's Mason Brotherhood craftsmen to work on his own. It wasn't an exaggeration to build an exquisite 3-story palace for himself and the other kings in the original Frost Dragon's lair. Duque's own villa was a Duke level 2.5 stories. What was the result? 2.5 stories above and 3 stories below the ground, for a total of 5 stories. In this Duke's mansion, Duque set up a magic array. First he summoned Khadgar, Alonso's Thaddeus and Farina. Then Vanessa opened the door to welcome the guests. Seeing Alonso's fail, these guests or helpers all bowed their heads. Nice to meet you, teacher. Theon and Gavinrad bowed their heads first, followed by Riataline and Benedictus, who were second in line, and then Sally Whitemane. I'm no longer a living person, so let's dispense with the customs of the mortal world. Alonso's was quite happy to see that his disciple was still active in the front line of fighting against evil. After some pleasantries, Duque went straight to the point. Since Si-Thun is using all the insects to attack and stall for time, we won't be able to break into the deepest part of the Temple of Ankh-Courage for a while. So while the enemy is increasing in strength, we have to do something. My suggestion is to find a way to purify and absorb the souls of the twin emperors into the magic net as nodes of the magic net. At the same time, we can see if we can extract the divinity of the twin emperors and plant the seeds of divinity for those who are determined to break into the realm of gods. Even though everyone knew that Duque had always been kind, no one really thought that Duque would take out the divinity as a trophy. In everyone's hearts, that was basically the absolute territory of the number one person in the Alliance, Duque. And this time, even if Queen Sylvanas didn't participate in the fight against the twin emperors, Duque probably had a 70% to 80% chance of winning. Everyone was moved. Theon was even more respectful. I'm a straightforward person, and I rarely admire anyone. But I want to say, besides my teacher Fail and Wuther, you are the third person I admire. Everyone offered words of praise. Duque waved his hand. Our fate is linked to Azeroth. If this planet is destroyed, Draenor is our role model. Even becoming a demigod is nothing to praise, as long as everyone remembers the saying. With great power comes great responsibility. They were all from the Alliance, so there was no need for formalities. Maybe if Azeroth collapsed, the Alliance could follow the example of the Horde, using the Dark Portal to roll to a certain planet and launch a desperate invasion. Victory could ensure the continuation of the race, but what about failure? The Horde was the best example. Thinking of this, every Alliance hero felt the same way. Duque continued, I'll skip the pleasantries and ask directly, Who wants to plant the seeds of a demigod? This time I expect to be able to extract 2 seeds. If you have the confidence, please come forward. There is a saying that goes, confidence may not necessarily win, but without confidence, you will definitely lose. Okay, who wants it first? There was such a thing as not passing on responsibility. Queen Sylvanas proudly stepped forward with her long bow on her back. Her long eyebrows were slightly raised, and she placed one hand on her hip. Her aura naturally spread out. The current alliance was said to be the 4 major races, but the dwarves were actually the vassals of the dwarves. Since the humans already had Duque, and the elves had Sylvanas, Magni also stepped forward with the Balrog hammer on his back. Count me in. Originally, William was also quite tempted, but after seeing Magni step forward, William smiled and didn't move. Duque waved his hand and took out the souls of the twin emperors. It wasn't an exaggeration. Different from the little surprise of Prophet Skyrim, the 2 demigod souls were Duque's biggest gain since attacking the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj. Chapter 1326. Unfortunately, the souls of the twin emperors were symbiotic, and could not be separated and used separately. Of course, the difficulty of subduing them had more than doubled. If there were difficulties, they had to go up, and if there were no difficulties, they had to go up. It seemed like I said something wrong. Forget it, don't mind this little detail. In the next moment, the souls of the twin emperors separately emerged from the palms of Duque's hands. Emperor Vecnaliz's eyes widened, and he stared angrily at everything in front of him, but he immediately realized his powerlessness, because like his brother Emperor Veclor, he had lost their demigod bodies, and became pure spiritual bodies. Yo, twin emperors, how are you feeling? Duque's face in their vision became immeasurably huge, and very much in need of a beating. They opened their mouths, but were shocked to find that they could only let out soundless roars. They tried to change everything, using all the power they could use to change the situation. But unfortunately, the soul prison had completely sealed off all their power. The only thing they could do now was to be prisoners, captives, and obediently wait here for the victor, Duque, to judge them. Duque gently tossed his hands up, and the 2 soul prisons rose slowly, until they were imprisoned in midair by the magic array. Duque snapped his fingers, and under everyone's gaze, the souls of the twin emperors began to grow, becoming the size of a dwarf. Twin emperors. Didn't you say that the victor gets everything? Now, as the victors, Duke Marcus and Sylvanas Windrunner, come enjoy our spoils of war. Duque pulled Queen Sylvanas over, and they stood side by side. Clearly, the faces of the twin emperors twitched in pain. What had been said not long ago still echoed in the ears of the 4 of them. The reward of the victor should not be discounted. The etiquette of the loser should be done to the extreme. Right? They had said so. However, that was both the emperor's reserve and pride, and the absolute confidence of the strong. True warriors never thought about the consequences of failure, because they never thought that they would fail. Admittedly, they could be as ugly as those captured mortals. For example, slamming the soul barrier in front of him with all his might. But this kind of thing, other than showing their helplessness, they would also lose their demeanor. They would not do it. Because to them, this kind of ugly behavior was even crueler than death. Although the twin emperors had already experienced the pain of their bodies being blown up alive by the most intense holy light in history, that was only the torture of mortal bodies. The real torture was on the soul. They had lost. The 2 brothers had actually lost to a mortal woman, and a human demigod who had yet to unleash his full power. He once thought that they were incomparably powerful, second only to Sethun's power, second only to Sethun's perfection. They didn't even care about the other ancient gods who were as famous as Sethun. But now, the cruel reality struck their worldview again and again. Anger, hatred, abomination. Even so, even though they gritted their teeth tightly, the twin emperors did not even need to speak. Their minds were connected, and they had already made their decision. The twin emperors echoed each other. Speak. Winner. What spoils of war do you want? Duque nodded. The first thing I want is your divinity. I mean divinity that has been stripped of your will. leaving only the characteristics of combat and magic. The divinity of other gods was not so easy to take. Apart from representing power and energy, divinity also represented the will and characteristics of a god or a demigod, especially the will. If the will left on the divinity was forcibly dispelled, the result would either be failure, and the will above would backfire, or it would be like Duque dealing with Prophet Skirim before, where the loss was huge, and it would be amazing if there was even one left after 2 points of divinity. If the other took the initiative to remove the divinity, that was another matter. Duque was not worried that the twin emperors would not give in. The biggest difference was not that there was no gain, but how much gain. Yes, the oath of the emperors will not be broken. Having said that, the twin emperors were very straightforward, and directly began to withdraw the will on their divinity. This was not a simple thing. Divinity, as the most important asset of a demigod, was usually eager to inject the largest and most resolute will into it, to prevent it from being seized by the enemy. Every demigod did everything possible to stamp their own mark on every corner of the divinity. Now to remove the will in their divinity, and in a state where they had lost their divine body and had no support, the difficulty and hardships could be imagined. Duque wanted to provide magical support, but was refused by the stubborn emperor. This process lasted for a full half an hour, during which no one spoke, quietly watching the twin emperors cast the spell. It was finally done. All right. Here. The emperor will fulfill his promise. The twin emperors, echoing each other, gave 2 big gifts. Under the system prompt, Duque clearly saw the label on it. Melee non-attribute divinity 3 points, magic divinity 3 points, optional types, arcane, frost, fire, nature. A total of 6 points of divinity, and the twin emperors being so straightforward was also unexpected. Duque first carefully let the system check it, and after confirming that there were no problems, he made the second request. He hoped that the twin emperors would become his elemental emissary. Unexpectedly, it was rejected by the other party with incomparable firmness. No, there is no room for negotiation. Absolutely not. The emperor can lose his empire, can lose his subjects and wealth, and even lose his queen, but the emperor must never kneel to the enemy. Duque's eyes narrowed. Didn't you say that the winner gets everything? The twin emperors were obviously angry, and like a machine gun, they opened the chatterbox. The entire Encourage insect people empire is the servant of the greatest god, Sithun. This is the will that is imprinted in the depths of every insect person's soul, and absolutely cannot be changed. Your request, we can't do it, and our failure does not mean that we surrender. Even if you are the winner, you are not qualified to gain our loyalty. You will fail in the end. The Supreme Sithun will lead the Courage insect people to occupy this world. That's right, humans, orcs, elves, trolls, whatever, are only worthy of being food for the Courage insect people. Feel lucky for your short victory. Your victory will end with the further awakening of our Lord Sithun. Haha. Ha 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 ha. They were obviously 2 losers, but they laughed wildly and wantonly like conquerors who had won a complete victory. Not only did they laugh, but they also used their spiritual power to show scenes of terrible cruelty with sound effects. Chapter 1327. That was when the Cenarian fortress had yet to be reactivated, and there was only a team of night elves guarding it. The insects that covered the mountains and plains easily flooded the entire fortress. No. Is the War of the Shifting Sands going to start again? The ones guarding the fortress were the night elves' most elite sentries. So what? They were too few in number. The sharp arrows easily pierced the skulls of the insects, and the arrows that penetrated the brain took the insect's life. Shoot 1 dead, and 3 more charged forward. Shoot 3 dead, and a swarm of them surged forward. They were already short on manpower, and the vast fortress defense line was not something that could be maintained by a mere 30 people. In the blink of an eye, the entire defense line was broken through. As the captain, the druid merely sent out an owl to send a message. The sturdy armor was easily pierced through by the sharp mouthparts of the giant insects, and with a ripping sound, the armor and the delicate limbs were torn apart like a piece of paper. Duran. Sherna. An elf couple was instantly pushed away by the swarm of insects. The cruel insects did not kill them on the spot. Instead, they pierced their collarbones with their sharp horns and held them up high, facing each other, letting out a unique howl as if they were showing off. "No, let her go. You can do whatever you want to me. Let her go." The strong Duran broke down. He cried and howled, begging the intelligent insects to let go of his lover. But all he got was the cruelest execution. The insects bit off their hands and feet one by one, swallowing and chewing them in front of each other. In the end, when their lower abdomens were bitten off, the couple, far away from home, breathed their last in each other's eyes of despair. Seeing this, Tyrande was already furious. Her whole body was trembling. Duque was silent. He gently pulled Tyrande over and held her in his arms. He raised his hand to stop the twin emperor's provocative performance, but was suddenly stopped by Tyrande. "No. I want to see it to the end." It was not just her. Even though the faces of Queen Sylph and the other alliance champions were filled with anger, and even though their fists were already trembling from clenching too tightly, not a single person tried to stop the twin emperors. Sigh. Duque let out a long sigh. The scene changed to Thunder Cliff. A family of Tauren herdsmen were playing with their kodo beasts that were as large as rhinoceroses. The swarm of insects had arrived. They came without any scruples. The brave Tauren father used the thick totem pole to smash the 3 insects to death. Then his hands and feet were pierced by the long insect mouthparts and lifted up high. As the price for daring to resist the Karaj insect people, his punishment was that in front of him, the insects first ate his 2 sons who were 3 years old and 1 year old, then his lover. Finally, under the ferocious laughter of the leader of the Karaj insect people guards, he ordered the insects to dismember his body and eat him. What the father saw on his deathbed was the twisted heads of his wife and son. The scene changed again. At the tree shade inn at the junction of the Dust Wallow Swamp and the crossroads. Because of the wood trade between the Alliance and the Horde, this place became the most harmonious place for humans and beastmen. Originally, this place was full of laughter. Even though both sides were armed with weapons, they were more like decorations. The heroic Theramore warriors dared to compete in drinking with the beastmen, who were 1 size bigger than them. They dared to arm wrestle with them. Even if they lost, they kept fighting. On everyone's faces, there was no longer any hatred in the past. When the swarm of insects arrived, everything changed. A huge number of flying insects drowned everything. The Alliance's artillery couldn't even fire 3 shots before the cannoneer's head was cut off by the flying insects. On the simple arrow tower of the Horde, the troll thrower didn't even have time to throw a few javelins before the tower was knocked down by the giant insects the size of mammoths. He fell to the ground and was then swarmed by the insects and eaten. The humans and beastmen who were once enemies stood back to back and launched a desperate counterattack against the swarm of insects. Everything was in vain. Blood stained every corner of the tree shade inn. Every wall was brutally smashed through. Every wooden pillar was bitten off like a tooth-grinding toy. Every warrior or civilian, together with their armor, was swallowed alive. Regardless of race, regardless of identity, regardless of age, regardless of man or woman, old or weak, sick or disabled. Seeing this, the Alliance heroes present were already beyond furious. However, the twin emperors added fuel to the fire. The Karaji insects are the supreme rulers who rule this planet on behalf of our Lord. Just as you humans eat pigs, cows, chickens, and ducks, you lowly races are just food for us insect people. So don't be delusional. The noble insect people will never become your slaves. Until this moment, everyone finally understood. The twin emperors boasted of their nobility, but they were willing to concede defeat and give up their most precious divinity. But deep down they didn't think that their race had failed. And they still boasted of being noble and unparalleled. How laughable and pathetic was this? They were obviously Thun's slaves, but they were pretentious. They were clearly about to be exterminated, but they considered themselves to be masters. Suddenly, 2 golden lights fell from the top of the space. This was the holy light that the Alliance heroes were familiar with and comfortable with. For the twin emperors, this was acid, this was torture. Ah! It hurts. Unable to control themselves, The twin emperors screamed at the same time. The people led by Duque were dumbfounded, looking at the perpetrator. If it was Gavin Rad who couldn't help but make a move, Duque felt that it was normal. The problem was that the person who made a move was the former Archbishop of Holy Light, Alonso's fail. Aren't you known to be kind? What about your three main virtues? The twin emperors laughed in pain. Ridiculous. Don't humans kill? Don't humans have instincts? Alonso said seriously with a straight face. The reason why intelligent creatures are intelligent creatures is that intelligent creatures have rationality. They know how to control their instincts, and not to indulge their instincts infinitely to trample on other intelligent creatures, and strangle the living space of other creatures. Alonso's increased the punishment of the holy light while continuing. Races that don't know how to live in peace with other intelligent races in the world and abuse natural resources wantonly will bring about their own destruction. As long as they are willing to repent, I can accept even their current tribe, because they have learned how to get along with other races. But it is clear that the current Karaji insect people are not qualified to exist in the world of Azeroth. Duque was speechless. Archbishop, you are so domineering. Don't you think so? Could this be the legendary monks don't lie, and if I say I will destroy your whole family, I will destroy your whole family? Or could it be that this is monks don't kill, and monks only kill familiar? Then may I ask, Archbishop, do you kill them after they are cooked or roasted? Chapter 1328. As Alonso said this, Duque smiled. As expected, this former Archbishop of the Holy Light was not a pedantic person who would not let go of benevolence and equality. If he was a blockhead, he would not have created the Paladin, a vicious profession that could fight, defend, and heal, despite having short legs. As a good friend and one of the biggest helpers on his path of growth, Duke naturally had to support Alonso's to the best of his abilities. Isn't it just a movie? I can do it too. Duque waved his hand, and a Hollywood-level explosion happened. A comet fell from the sky, and Tyron showed what it meant to destroy your entire family. In front of this earth-shattering destructive power that only the strongest demigods or true gods could resist, all mortal powers were useless. A mushroom cloud rose. The ash hive exploded. Mushroom clouds rose one after another. The Zora hive and Rego hive were finished too. As the Emperor, he had never taken the low-level insects seriously. He could do whatever he wanted to the insects. But in front of the enemy, even the low-level insects could not be easily humiliated. Duque's actions were a slap to the face, and a resounding slap at that. Didn't you think that the insects were powerful? Didn't you say that the insects were the rulers of Azeroth? Why did they have to exterminate their entire clan? The death of each insect queen represented the destruction of a hive and a branch of the insect race. In the video, the number of insects killed and corpses collected by the Alliance and Horde Alliance was clearly shown. This kind of slap to the face with big data was crueler and more effective. Not only that, Duque also provided real-time combat footage. At this moment outside, the Alliance's cannons shook the sky, and mushroom clouds of various sizes rose in the empty space in front of the Ahn'Qiraj temple. Not only did the insects at the center of the explosion die without a complete corpse, but even those within the range of the shockwave were stabbed to death by the sharp claws or broken limbs of their comrades. In the air, there were not many insects that could escape the large-scale coverage of the Tyron 3 bombs. Occasionally, a few of them managed to advance, but they had to face the barrage of magic bullets that poured down on them like a storm from the countless magic towers. If he was lucky enough to come over, there would be griffins and wyverns to intercept him at close range. It wasn't that there weren't any large bugs that tried to break through. There was one in the image that was as large as a train carriage that tried to break through. In the end, Onyxia, who was entrenched on the platform of the fortress, pounced on it. With a sweep of her dragon tail, it was smashed into pieces and fell to the ground. The twin emperors felt as if their hearts had been cut by a knife. The destruction of his clansmen was indeed heartbreaking. What Duque showed next were the scenes of Archimonde, Ragnaros, Nefarian, Onyxia, and other powerful figures being defeated or killed. Every scene was so soul-stirring that they were shock speechless. If it was an ordinary blow, although it was painful, They believed that they would be able to endure it in the end. Even if they had to endure the punishment and torture of the holy light, they were confident that their souls would not fall. Unfortunately, what they saw now was the greatest pain for them, because they saw the possibility of their master, Si Thun, being defeated. Si Thun was not invincible. 25,000 years ago, he had been defeated once, and he had been defeated very, very badly. Not only was he seriously injured, but he was also completely sealed, locked in the deepest part of the earth like a dog. Our master might be defeated. Once this thought arose, it could not be extinguished. Their only goal now was to persevere and refuse to give in to Duque. Although even the twin emperors themselves did not know what the meaning of their perseverance was, Si Thun was like a bright light in the dark, the last breath that supported their will. Duque's voice, which did not sound loud, was amplified by his divine power, almost 10 times louder than a loudspeaker. Every note shook the twin emperors' minds. Stupid and pitiful creatures who can't see the big picture. Don't you know that the existence in front of the wheel of history, no matter how great or small you are, will be completely crushed? This is fate. Fate was a very mysterious word. When someone was invincible, he was definitely a proud dragon, even daring to pierce through the sky. When he was defeated and depressed, this word was the most terrible and unsolvable curse, firmly binding his soul, with no hope of breaking free. Duque used the so-called fate to trick the Black Dragon Princess into becoming his mount after defeating her. When he had nothing to do, he would ride her for fun, and when he had something to do, he would ride her for battle. It felt so good. Now Duque had used this trick on the twin emperors. Duque's voice carried endless majesty and a hint of temptation. Are you still stubborn? Do you still expect your master Si Thun to turn the tables? This is ridiculous. The fate of Si Thun's destruction has been decided. In a month at most, you can see Si Thun's corpse. This time, not only did the twin emperors lose their voices, but even the alliance's powerhouses looked shocked. These words were too exaggerated. Impossible. You can't defeat our master. Not to mention the twin emperors, even the alliance's powerhouses were anxious for Duque. These words were too full of themselves. Even though Si Thun had been seriously injured, he was still a true god. Originally, the Alliance's attack on Encourage was something they had no choice but to do. It wasn't easy for Duque to become a demigod, which gave everyone more confidence. In everyone's hearts, it would be good if they could grind Si Thun to death or seal it again. Duque actually boasted that he could kill an ancient god in a month? Even if everyone knew that Duque wanted to subdue 2 true demigods, that was too exaggerated. Duque didn't care at all, and smiled with confidence. Twin emperors, why don't we make a bet? Duque's ambition was obvious, but the twin emperors couldn't be afraid. This was their last pride. Vecnala's face was cold. You're looking down on a true god too much. Vecnala's put on the same expression. This kind of bet that we will definitely win is meaningless. Duque still had his signature smile. I'm only asking you, do you dare or not? As you said and did, the winner gets everything. Within a month, as long as the Alliance, Horde, and Dragon's hero group cannot defeat Si Thun, or do not dare to fight Si Thun, I will naturally let you return to your master safely. At that time, if it wants to reconstruct your body or something else, I will not stop it. This bet could not be said to be small. As a price, the twin emperors naturally knew what they had to pay. The 2 brothers said in unison, as long as you or the Alliance can defeat our master Si Thun within a month, we will be loyal to you, and the entire Courage insect people will become the Alliance's slaves. Whether you want to enslave or slaughter them all, we won't complain. Chapter 1329. This oath sounded ridiculous. It was simply at the level of the Arabian Nights. After calming down and thinking about it carefully, one would find that it was not only Duque's side who had this idea. Similarly, the twin emperors were not idiots. If what Duque showed the twin emperors was only the scene of the destruction of the 3 insect nests of Silithus, it was just a demonstration. Then the scene of the insects coming out of the temple of Encourage to make a death charge told the twin emperors another key. After they were killed, Si Thun was tired of these worthless servants of the Courage insect people. Outsiders could not see it, But as the insect people emperors, they could definitely see that in the charging swarm of insects, there were a large number of insects that were not qualified to be soldiers. No race would let their young go to the battlefield unless it was a matter of survival. See, Thun was burning the bridge after crossing it. This was the core reason that made the twin emperors angry and loosened their minds. With the help of the system, Duque saw the age structure of the insects, which was why he seemed to gamble. He seemed reckless and even boastful. If you thought about it carefully, you would know that there was no such thing as failure in Duque's dictionary. If the Alliance's hero group failed, then whether the souls of the twin emperors would be returned would naturally be decided by the victorious Si Thun. It was impossible for Duque to use Si Thun's servants to coerce Si Thun to let him go. If the Alliance won, then the twin emperors would undoubtedly find a new way to survive for the Courage insect people who were at the end of their rope. Of course, if the Alliance did not win, then naturally there was no need to mention anything. They did not overly force the twin emperors to make a decision now, and everyone dispersed after the twin emperors made their promise. Kalia asked, "If we win against Si Thun, will we really accept those terrible insects?" Duque smiled. "Are the orcs scary? Cruel?" Kalia was suddenly enlightened. Yes, the orcs were also scary and cruel. These green-skinned humanoid monsters once ravaged the entire Eastern Kingdom, causing millions of deaths and injuries, plunging tens of millions of people into the flames of war, and bringing unforgettable terror and pain to all the major races of Azeroth. But now, these terrifying and cruel green-skinned creatures had become the allies of the entire Alliance. Was it funny? Was it worth hate and anger? Maybe, maybe not. In the face of the survival of an entire race, or even the entire planet, racial hatred was nothing. Thanks to the tireless propaganda and guidance of the various countries over the years, the people's hatred towards the orcs had been slightly reduced. At least until the new enemy was eliminated, the fuse would not be lit. This situation also applied to the Courage insect people. Those insects would be useful in many ways if they were used as mounts, Theon commented. Yes, such as rugged caves, Varian nodded. In the air, griffins could be used. On relatively flat ground, horses could be used. In cold forest areas, the elves' nightmares could be used. However, in rugged and complicated hot terrain, there was nothing more suitable than insects. Tyrant cleared her throat and emphasized, "You'll need it. Don't forget that 10,000 years have passed. The Burning Legion, which once had hundreds of millions of demon warriors, has once again set their sights on Azeroth. 10,000 years ago, Duque's infernal affairs had inflicted heavy losses on the Burning Legion. 10,000 years was too long. No one knew what kind of terrifying combat power the Burning Legion had gathered in this period of time. In a sense, not just the insects, all intelligent creatures in Azeroth should unite to deal with the Burning Legion." The conversation between the few big shots of the Alliance made the others think. At this time, Edwin Van Cleef came over and bowed to Duque. Then, he said in a voice that everyone could hear, "The Horde's heroes have just defeated Ayamis the Hunter, and are preparing to challenge Osrian the Scarless tomorrow." "Oh, not bad." Duque raised his eyebrows. "Unfortunately, the losses are a little big. In the ruins of Courage, the Horde has so far lost 4 former members of the Silver Moon Parliament and 3 second-rate chiefs who were resurrected as Death Knights." Hearing this news, the expressions of the Alliance's heroes were very strange. As former enemies, even if they were not enemies now, seeing an enemy who had been killed almost 20 years ago come back to life and scare people again was a very complicated feeling. Moreover, Sar's method of absorbing a large number of undead into the Horde had always made the Alliance's heroes feel disgusted. Now that those bones had been lost, from the Alliance's point of view, it was a loss of combat power. From the Alliance's point of view, it was no different from setting off firecrackers to celebrate. Duque turned to look at Tyrande. Tyrande immediately understood and ran to contact Fandral Staghelm. After a while, Tyrande returned. "It's good news. Because Si Thun realized that he could not further corrode the earth, he has begun to recover his divine power. What it could collect was only the Lilian ego that it had plundered in the Silithus territory. This process will probably last for about 10 days. Duque said, Edwin informed Sar of the situation. Let him do as he sees fit. No one was willing to fight an ancient god who had recovered better. Wait for more combat power? Launch an attack while the ancient god was weak before he recovered? This was a very difficult choice. There was no such thing as having the best of both worlds. The higher the level of a commander, the more painful choices they had to make in all kinds of unfavorable situations. Fortunately, while Si-Thun was accumulating strength, the alliance was not idle either. Duque split the 3 points of divinity from the Sword Emperor Vecnalas into 3 portions. One was for Magni, one was for Servanas, and the last one was for him. Even though each portion did not actually have a single point of divinity, it was a special energy that contained divine power waves. And don't think that Vecnalas only knew how to use a sword. In reality, he was also one of Azeroth's specialties. Almost all the experts in this world were all-rounders. For example, Anduin Lothar could wield a 5-meter-long lance while riding a horse, shoot a squirrel's eye from 50 meters away with a bow while on horseback, and swing a two-handed greatsword like it was child's play. What weapon he used to be famous was purely because he was most comfortable with it. Vecnala's archery was also very good. The experts of the alliance were basically all in important positions. After witnessing the twin emperor's submissive bet, everyone dispersed. After Duque had arranged other matters, he could finally relax. Unknowingly, it was already late at night. In the villa in Naxxramas, Duque collapsed on the sofa, not wanting to move even half a finger. He was too tired. He had just become a demigod, and had to rush over to save the day. Then there were all kinds of trivial matters. Suddenly, he heard a knock on the door. Come in. A beautiful figure flashed in front of the magic lamp at the door. Accompanied by a fragrant wind, a graceful blonde figure appeared in front of him. Ha! Chapter 1330. Speaking of which, there were a lot of things to do recently. He was either busy angering Kel Thuzad or advancing to demigod, so Duque hadn't had the time to be with his lover for a long time. Duque had some expectations. He thought that Servanas would attack him in a fit of excitement, and he also thought that Onyxia would come to court him, but he never thought that it would be her. She had been commanding and fighting on the front lines for a long time. Coupled with the agile fighting style of a ranger, her body fat content was extremely low. But she wasn't like the King Kong Barbie and the knights who swung their swords to the point of bursting with muscles. She only had a shallow waistline between her abdomen. She was slightly taller than most human women. And coupled with her full and firm Mount Hygel, which was illegal even among humans, she was the focal point of men no matter where she was. Her round and firm buttocks were full of elasticity, and her pair of fair and slender legs elevated her glamorous and aloof temperament to the extreme. Coupled with a full set of black stockings, underwear, high heels, and black gauze pajamas. Are you trying to kill me? Duque made a muffled sound in his throat, and after a long time he squeezed out a sentence from between his teeth. Aurelia. What? Why can't it be me? Don't you like me? Or is it that you're looking forward to someone else? With a smile, Aurelia put her left hand on her waist, showing off her proud S-shaped curves. She was very satisfied with her outfit that dazzled Duque. If you just looked at her from the neck up, you would think that she looked like a lady who was about to attend a grand ball with light makeup. However, when she gently took off the hairpin that held her hair in place at the back of her head and looked at her cascading blonde hair, you would think that she looked like a beautiful warhorse that was about to gallop with its front hooves raised high. Nobility, sexiness, wildness, these seemingly incompatible qualities perfectly blended together on Aurelia. Darling. With a long, seductive voice, Aurelia slowly climbed up on her hands and feet. She swayed her body and showed Duque what a standard catwalk was. Mount Hygel displayed the violent beauty of mass and volume, which deeply stimulated Du's optic nerves. The chiffon pajamas slid across Duque's legs, making Duque shiver again and again. Unknowingly, Duque only knew how to swallow his saliva. Suddenly, he remembered that before he transmigrated, he had the Chilan arm mastery, and he had suffered a lot. The pain of not knowing the taste of meat really makes me cry just thinking about it. Uhu. Why are you so excited today? Duque asked Aurelia. Take a guess. Aurelia, who was usually gentle and generous, showed a rare kind of seductive slyness. For a moment, Duque almost thought that the person in front of him was Jaina and not Aurelia. However, seeing Aurelia's pointed and long elven ears trembling, Duque, who was familiar with her habits, knew that Aurelia must be hiding something from him. And it was usually not a big deal, because as long as it was a big deal, she would definitely be open and honest. She would first deal with the big or business matters, and then deal with the small and personal matters. At this thought, Duque decided to tease Aurelia, and he suddenly put on a serious face. Aurelia, I just became a demigod, and my stamina, energy, and magic power are all greatly depleted. If there's nothing big, let's sleep peacefully tonight, okay? When Aurelia heard this, her face almost collapsed. It wasn't easy for me to make up my mind to put on the decisive underwear, but when it came to the last minute, you, Duque, actually said that you don't want to do it. Is she flirting with a blind man? However, in the next second, Duque burst into laughter. Since my dear sister Aurelia has such a refined interest, of course I will accompany you to death. However, I will have to trouble sister to put in more effort. Looking at Duque's smirk, Aurelia clearly saw that there was a demon tail on Duque's buttocks that should theoretically exist, wagging proudly. This guy is clearly ripping me off. Little rascal. She pouted, but the noble and beautiful female elf blushed and slowly lowered her body. A swordsman must be extremely familiar with his divine sword and scabbard. For something like the sword drawing technique, if one did not maintain long-term practice, the speed and power of the sword would be greatly reduced. Duque was very surprised today. He had clearly displayed his invincible prowess, and the ferocious sword light could be said to be able to chill 19 continents with a single sword light, but Aurelia still fought with all her might. She charged at the start of the battle, and not only did she break his armor, she also directly used the freezing trap and raging flame trap. This almost caused Duque's sword aura to leak out, and he was defeated 1,000 miles away. After Duque stabilized his sword, he launched a continuous counterattack, using the tactic of attacking separately and jointly. He had clearly defeated her, but she still persisted in resisting. Usually, at this time, Aurelia would call for her sister to be her reinforcements. But today, she was not her usual self, and persisted in fighting against the great demon King Duque alone. What the hell was she doing? In the end, Sasha, who was outside the battlefield, could not help but join in the battle, and with Duque going easy on her, the battle ended in a draw. After the battle ended, Duque stroked the gold and silver heads, and asked in a kind voice, "What the hell were the two of you doing? It's time for you to tell me." Aurelia moved her head to make herself more comfortable on Duque's chest. "Nothing, I just want a child." "Okay." Sasha agreed with her sister. This was not because of the sudden silence that some people were most afraid of. It was just that Duque was a little stunned. Yes, it had been more than 20 years since he had transmigrated. Even if he was already in a state of eternal life, in theory, he should be considered an uncle. Aurelia had always wanted a child, and Duque knew that. He did not expect Sasha's wife-like nature to erupt at this time. Although he had always been very casual, it was also very important to make his woman happy. Then Duque smiled. "Silly, you have to tell me about this. I am no longer a mortal. If I do not inject my power and soul, there will be no result even if we fight 10,000 times. We were afraid that you would not agree, or that you hate children, so we joined forces to give you some sweets first." "Okay." Sasha seemed to subconsciously draw circles on Duque's chest with her slender fingers. "Are you blaming me for not agreeing?" This time, it was Duque's turn to smirk. "All right, seeing that I quite like this dessert." With that, Duque extended his evil claws towards the trembling sisters. The sky was bright. The Windrunner sisters were still sleeping because they were extremely tired, but Duque could clearly feel that the continuation of his life and soul had already been nurtured in their bodies. Chapter 1331. A ranger's senses were very sharp. Aurelia, who had woken up first, immediately noticed the changes in herself. It was a new life that belonged to both her and Duque. In her lower abdomen, there was a wind elemental blessing of light and nature. Duque. Not knowing what to say, Aurelia hugged Duque tightly and kissed him passionately. After a long time, their lips parted. 10 months later, then, Duque gently pressed his index finger against his lover's red lips. 10 months definitely won't do. That means I'll lose you forever. This. He woke Sasha up as well. With Duque's explanation, the Windrunner sisters finally understood why 10 months wouldn't do. It wasn't like ordinary humans, and high elves didn't have interracial love in the 2,800 years of the alliance between humans and elves. Not to mention the more recent ones. There was Gina Goldsword, who had given birth to King Dalen Proudmoore's illegitimate daughter. Generally speaking, pregnancy was the same as a human's. The key was that Duque had already surpassed the limits of humans. If he wanted to give birth to a child, he had to abide by the laws of the world of Azeroth. The more powerful the existence at the top of the food chain, the more difficult it was to give birth to a similarly powerful descendant. This was quite demanding of parents. For example, Nethario, the Wing of Death, had slapped so many female black dragons and killed them all. Only the strongest Sinestra survived, which was why Nefarian and Onyxia, who were both demigods, were born. Similarly, Elun, the goddess of the moon, couldn't find a suitable true god as a partner. She could only marry the strongest demigod, Malorn, and give birth to the demigod Cenarius. Of course, the descendants of existences who had stepped into the realm of gods were more about the inheritance of power and energy, not ordinary reproduction. The most effective way was naturally for both sides to contribute a portion of their power or divine power and combine them together, so that their descendants could directly become demigods. It was not impossible to slack off. It was like pouring soy sauce into water. You could make do with whatever you wanted. If Duque didn't want his descendants to really do nothing, he had to put in more effort. From a mortal's point of view, Aurelia was very strong. It was a pity that Duque's soul was an oddity. Unless one became a demigod, it would be impossible for him to have any descendants. This indirectly increased the requirements. If a mortal woman wanted to give birth to a demigod, she would not be able to satisfy the energy needed for her offspring in minutes. She would die of exhaustion. Now that the war was imminent, and Aurelia and Sasha were unwilling to wait any longer, Duque could only purposely extend the incubation period. This would give his descendants more time to absorb energy and grow. What? At least 3 years. The Windstalker sisters' mouths pouted, so much so that a soy sauce bottle could be hung from it. Duque shrugged. It's already very fast, and that's taking into account that you have to stay in the magic array for a few days every month. It can't be helped. I'm a demigod of the magic element, and most of my children are magic element as well. If I don't replenish enough magic element, just relying on your own elemental absorption ability won't be enough. Oh, also you are forbidden from participating in Thun's upcoming battle. I don't want the Mediv incident to happen again. Azeroth can't afford another dark portal incident. The Windrunner sisters opened their mouths. They were in pain and helplessness. Aegwynn had claimed to have killed Sargeras, but in the end, she found out that Sargeras' soul had run into her stomach and taken over her son's soul. That was how the dark portal incident happened. If there was a precedent, and someone killed Thun and was possessed by Thun, that would be a waste of their intelligence. It would be too tragic. Duque, is there any other way? Sasha asked weakly. There is. Don't have children before the world is at peace. No. We must have children. Aurelia and Sasha said at the same time. Then they entered a magical grieving mode. It's over. We can't go to the battlefield for 3 years. My bow and arrows. The days when I couldn't sleep and went to the void battlefield to hunt. Everything is for the children. Sob, sob, sob. The two sisters hugged each other. The scene was unbearable to look at. They even warned Duque fiercely not to have any thoughts of getting them to abort the children. Otherwise, they would fall out with Duque. All right. You chose the path. Duque sighed. He rubbed his brows and left the room. Women became mothers the moment they became pregnant, but it was a long and slow process for men to become fathers. Men would not feel like they had children if they did not see their children jumping around and demolishing houses. Duque was very busy. After a rare peaceful sleep, He had no choice but to turn on his daily work mode the next morning. The adjustments to the weave had not been completed, and there were many things that Khadgar could not decide. He could only ask Duque. After the twin emperors reached a tacit agreement with him, things like the twin emperors being captured began to happen, causing their control over the insectoids to decline. For example, in a coincidental situation, some people in the Alliance found that as long as they held a kind of crystal that was nicknamed Insectoid Crystal, they could summon a four-legged insectoid of the same color. With a thought, as long as they were willing to wait, it would not take long for the insectoid to run over and wait for orders. Not only were they willing to be mounts, but they would also obey orders even if they were told to attack their own kind. Of course, these insectoids that could be used as mounts did not have much combat power, and were only slightly better than human militias. When faced with formally trained warriors, their fragile long legs that could be easily cut off by standard steel swords were not enough. Even so, it was a wonderful experience. A few days ago, the two great formations that were still fighting to the death, and would not stop until one side was dead, had now completely surrendered. After noon, Duque had his lunch. When he finished patrolling Naxxrama's fortress and returned to the main control room, he found that many women were looking at him strangely, and most of them were high elves. Some had seductive looks, as if they wanted to swallow him up. Some were shy and unbearable, but also seemed to be unable to restrain their curiosity, not daring to look at him, but glancing at him from time to time. Duque had a headache. After returning to his office, he saw that no one was around and pulled Vanessa over. "Hey, what the hell is going on today? Why is every woman looking at me strangely? Woo woo woo. You finally can't stand it? Marcus the Beast Duke, oh your majesty the Beast Demigod Marcus. You finally can't control your beastly nature, and you want to lay your hands on your lovely and gentle maid? Woo woo woo. Although I used to be lucky and thought that you still had humanity and conscience, I didn't expect. Woo woo woo." Vanessa rubbed her eyes with her hands and howled dryly, looking at his maid's instant acting, and then looking at his bastard chicken leg staff. 3 crows suddenly appeared. Caw caw caw. Duque felt an unusual pain in the ass. Damn it. I don't know if I should say something. Chapter 1332. Damn it, don't tease me. What exactly happened? Tell me quickly. Veins popped up on Duque's forehead, and he looked like he was about to eat someone alive. Seeing how anxious her master was, Vanessa giggled heartlessly. Looks like my dear master. Even though you've left your mortal body and become a demigod, you're still that beast of a duke. Alright, I'll stop teasing you. Seeing that Duque was really going to flip out, Vanessa stopped while she was ahead. It was Lady Aurelia's suggestion. Aurelia? What about her? Duque was stunned. Nothing, because Lady Aurelia is pregnant with your child. After telling His Majesty Sylvanas, His Majesty Sindorii hinted that she wanted to focus on becoming a demigod, so he won't stop the other beauties in the Alliance from pursuing you. Wait a minute. Why can't I understand this kind of dazzling operation? That was the expression of the dumbfounded Duque. A second later, Duque laughed involuntarily. He recalled that he had the reputation of being a playboy in the Alliance. In recent years, there had been a lot less women, and the biggest reason was because Queen Sylvanas used her aura to protect him. With a valiant temperament and sharp eyes, the 3 Windrunner sisters accompanied him on all kinds of occasions with an aura that made others shrink back. They were originally great beauties that were 1 in a million. They had received the complete training of nobility, and with the perfect figure unique to the High Elves, as well as the battlefield achievements that made mortal women tremble in fear. The 3 sisters were the most unique scenery in all the Alliance gatherings. In terms of beauty alone, there might be some noble ladies in the Alliance who could approach their level, but with the addition of Sylvanas' status as the queen, it was enough to make all mortal women despair. Those with beauty did not have the status. Those with the status did not have the ability. Even if there were all 3, the 3 of them were together, and the addition of the beautiful sisters was terrifying. If they did not nod, who would dare say that they would definitely be able to get a place in Duque's harem? Naturally, the Windrunner sisters brushed off all the beauties who failed in their eyes. Duque had a strange expression on his face. Then why did Cervantes suddenly? Vanessa sighed. It's all because I'm afraid you'll mess around. Don't you think about who you've pushed down recently? Who can stop you if your taste goes crazy? His Majesty wasn't too willing at first, but Lady Aurelia persuaded him to think of Cenarius, and His Majesty immediately agreed. Yes, the goddess and the white deer demigod, and then the goddess gave birth to the forest demigod Cenarius in the form of a centaur. Just imagining such a scene was very dirty. As a transmigrator, Duque could not help but think about it. In Greek mythology, how did Zeus, the most unscientific geneticist in history, create the tauren? How did his brother, Poseidon, create so many sea monsters? Please listen to the story of Zeus the bulldozer. Pfft, Duque choked. He really spat it out. At the end of the day, it was all his fault. At the end of the day, it was all because he played dragon taming with Onyxia on a whim. Alright, although she was in human form when she tamed the dragon, no one would forget her identity as the Black Dragon Princess. Oh my god. So I've already embarked on the path of no return for the beastly Duke? Duque suddenly found that his life had become gloomy. Caw caw caw. The crows on a tiche cawed again. For some reason in Duque's ears, it became, HQ. Discovered a pervert. Now under arrest. No, my taste is very normal. Duque swore in front of Miss Vanessa, the representative of the grand jury. Really? Duque did not notice the craftiness in Vanessa's eyes. Really? Duque raised 3 fingers and swore. As long as it's a good-looking beauty, I like it. Really? Then shall we play a little game? What game? Take a guess how many fan of knives, throwing knives do I have hidden down there? Vanessa threw out the question, and then, with an elegant ladylike bow, she lifted the hem of her skirt with both hands. As a transmigrator who was deeply poisoned by Japanese culture, Duque deeply hated the traditional black, thick and monotonous maid uniform in Azeroth's aristocratic mansions. As early as 10 years ago, Duque had already developed the standard maid uniform in the anime style. The maid uniform was black with white flowers. There was a black and white butterfly tie, and below it was a low-cut, deep V neckline. However, the parts that were supposed to be exposed were covered by a hazy white muslin. The lower abdomen was a 3-row white muslin binding design at the top, middle, and bottom. The back was a breathable lace carving design, and the back was a large white bow at the back. The skirt was made of soft satin, matched with white lace at the hem. To reduce temptation, it was a mid-skirt design that went past the knees. However, the hem of the skirt seemed to be rising higher and higher. As expected, the long tube of translucent black stockings was evil. Now Duque's eyes could not move away at all. The long skirt swayed rhythmically, one left, one right, one left, one right, inch by inch, as if it was some kind of evil rhythm, tugging at Duke's heartstrings, inch by inch, as if it had become some kind of evil rhythm. Gulp. This was the sound of someone swallowing saliva. Finally, it reached the end of the long tube of black stockings. He saw it. He was almost there. That was the black silk suspender to prevent the stockings from slipping off. He saw it. Of course there were no flying knives. Yo, my dear master, you still haven't guessed it? Vanessa's eyes were like silk, and she leaned slightly closer to Duque. But with this leaning, Duque immediately realized that the maid in front of him was no longer the maid that her father had thrown over to be a maid, the one that could not do anything well. Instead, she was a mature and charming woman that he had bestowed eternal life and youth. Even though she said that, her hands didn't stop lifting her skirt. Hey, my master, do you really not have any speech to express? Speech. Yes. Of course there was. Not to mention speech. I can even make a freestyle for you. The problem is that that thing is too simple. It would be embarrassing for me, a demigod, to say it. With a thought, Duque opened his mouth and said, Guan Guan Ju Jiu in the state of the river. A fair and graceful lady. A gentleman's desire. This passage of classical Chinese from Transmigration was enough to make Vanessa choke to death. She was dumbfounded. Looking at her face full of question marks, Duque felt smug in his heart. Your master, has finally turned the tables. Do you really want to know? Do you really want to know? I won't tell you. You want me to say something human? Sure. There were only 6 words. Black. Lace. F*CK. Of course, Vanessa knew that Duque was counterattacking. After a short moment of panic, she was not angry. Instead, she directly revealed the mystery. Clang clang. Pfft. Duque spat out a mouthful of old blood and gritted his teeth. You tricked me. Why? Safety pants and whatnot. It was all F*King evil. Chapter 1333. The leader was angry. Oh no, Duque was angry. The anger of a demigod was very scary. Duque roared on the spot, and was about to grab Vanessa. He didn't care about the consequences, he would beat her on the ass first. Haha. What evil, you're clearly a beast, Duke. You're thinking the wrong way. Facing Duque's pounce, Vanessa nimbly lowered her body and easily dodged him like a slippery eel. Force stealth and sprint, she ran out like a wisp of smoke. Unless Duque was serious, he wouldn't be able to catch a hero-level thief who only wanted to run. Just you wait. Don't let me catch you. At the gate, Duque made a declaration like a big villain. In the next second, Duque's face and posture froze as if he had been petrified. He suddenly realized that beside the gate, his other maid, Solarian, was standing there with a smile on her face. Of this I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Master, you don't have to apologize to a little maid. Solarian nodded lightly with a smile. Duque looked Solarian up and down. Seeing that the master astromancer was normal, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. What, master? Do you want me to be like other girls and cut my skirt a few inches shorter, or open my collar a few inches, and then secretly wear the so-called winning underwear? Solarian's smile widened. Please, please don't. Duque's face fell. I'm so happy. It seems that after becoming a mage and demigod master, you're still the gentleman you used to be. Solarian seemed a little excited. Duque was a little embarrassed. He didn't know if he should tell her that before he transmigrated, the word gentleman was synonymous with pervert. Duque facepalmed. I'm also very happy. At least there's a normal woman by my side. Not really. My family also sent word that I can successfully conceive your child, master, Solarian said calmly. Duque burst out laughing. Is it that surprising? In Cule Salis, commoners without magic talent always hoped to give their daughters to noble mages. As long as they could give birth to a boy or a girl with magic talent, they would be lucky. In the eyes of the high elves, only by mastering magic could one change one's fate. Even great nobles with noble bloodlines would hope to marry into other great mage families, so that their descendants would have a greater chance of becoming Silver Moon counselors. Please note that even after Her Majesty Sylvanas Windrunner ascended to the throne, this practice is still deeply rooted among the Blood Elves. After listening to Solarian's explanation, Duque more or less understood why the elven girls were suddenly so enthusiastic. The High Elves were originally magic maniacs. After splitting from the Night Elves, they had been worshipping the spellcasters for 8,000 years. Even though the Sindorii kingdom was now ruled by rangers, how could the customs of 8,000 years be changed so easily? But Duque couldn't figure out what Queen Sylvanas was thinking. What about you? What do you think? Duke asked, as if he was possessed by some supernatural being. I don't know. Maybe when the time comes, I won't refuse. Not refusing might not necessarily be willing. Is it because of Kale that's? Sigh, I haven't paid attention to him for a long time. Please don't misunderstand, master. From the moment I swore allegiance to you, I no longer have anything to do with Kale that's. He is more like a beautiful vision of my childhood, a dream that is destined to never come true. I have accepted my fate, and I am doing well now. After a pause, Solarian continued. Of course, if you want me to kill Kale that's, I will do it. After all, when that day comes, Kale that's will probably have committed an unforgivable crime for the Alliance. But I think when I do it, I will probably hesitate. Duque was a little surprised, but also a little relieved. This was human nature. This was the Solarian of flesh and blood, and not the Solarian that Duke had in mind. The Solarian that should only appear in the Storm Fortress, with no backstory at all. She was like a boss that was made out of paper. Phew. Thank you for your honesty. Duque smiled, waved his hand, and then ran to find Queen Sylvanas. Looking at Duque's back, Solarian seemed to be lost in thought. On the other hand, perhaps it was the so-called no comparison, no harm. When Thrall, who was fighting in the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj, heard the news from the Alliance through the undead thief messenger, the expression on his face was very interesting. What? They didn't lose much, and they have already taken care of the other leaders of the Ahn'Qiraj temple. They are resting while waiting for us to finish here, and then besiege Sithun? At this time, Orgrim walked in front of Thrall, and his voice rumbled. There is no need to worry, Thrall. As a great chief, figure out what you can do and what you can do well. If you can understand this, you are an outstanding chief. Thrall sighed. Just being outstanding is not enough. In peacetime, an outstanding leader was generally enough to close the gap with a rival country. Unfortunately, this was wartime, and any small gap could be infinitely magnified. The tribe originally had fewer strong people than the Alliance, and it was not easy for them to accept the Forgotten Ones and slightly close the gap with the Alliance. Suddenly, there was news that the commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, had become a demigod. In comparison, the tribe had suffered heavy losses in the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj, which was even weaker. Although the Forsaken were dead, the dead could not die a second time. If he was killed again, then his body and soul would be destroyed in the truest sense. Even Anastrian, as the leader of the Forgotten Ones, could not find a good way. Even if they lost a second-rate chief who had become an undead warrior and a former Silver Moon counselor who had become a lich, it was still a great loss. In fact, the Sun King's face was gloomy. After being ruthlessly expelled from the Eastern Kingdom by the Alliance, the Forgotten Ones had lost a stable source of troops. Originally, they hoped that after joining the tribe, Thrall would allow the Forgotten Ones to resurrect new Forgotten Ones from the dead tribe warriors, who knew that Thrall would begin to believe in the way of nature, and firmly rejected him. Not only that, even Orgrim, who was theoretically his subordinate, was on Thrall's side. Anastrian's gaze became even colder. Fortunately, he was a dead man. No matter when his body was filled with shadow energy and did not further decay, it was still full of a dark aura. No one noticed the change in his gaze. At this time, Orgrim patted Thrall's shoulder. Don't think too much. The tribe should do its own thing first. We must first not make mistakes, then wait for the real opportunity to come. Chapter 1334. After the Alliance Hero Squad had rested for a full 5 days, the Horde Hero Squad finally succeeded in killing Adrian the Scarless at the cost of 3 second-rate chiefs who had turned into undead warriors and 2 high-grade druids. Sal was not satisfied with the result, because the losses were too great. But he couldn't complain. Compared to the Alliance, the Horde obviously lacked healing methods. The druids from Thundercliff and the shamans trained by Orgrimmar were second-rate. Obviously, in terms of healing, the Alliance's priests and paladins were better. Moreover, the undead couldn't use natural healing spells, so they had to rely on the third-rate undead priests' dark healing magic. Whether they admitted it or not, the Alliance's heroes were far better than the Horde in terms of endurance. Cain refused to go into the arms of the Forgotten after the death of the Tauren druid. And because of this, he had a bad relationship with Anastrian. Sal was now twice as big as his head. Fortunately, the spoils of war dropped by Adrian slightly diluted this faint sadness. This hammer is good, I want it. Orgrimmar had his eyes on the frosted warhammer that Adrian dropped. Compared to the semi-artifact, Hammer of Destruction, that he used before, this thing was a transitional item, except for the fact that the hammerhead was square and looked like the Hammer of Destruction. Sal's mouth twitched, as if he wanted to say something. Orgrimmar patted Sal on the shoulder and said, "A dead man should look like a dead man. I'm already very happy to be able to jump out of the graveyard and continue to fight for the Horde. If I wanted the Hammer of Destruction back, I should have taken that thing to the grave instead of passing it on to you." "Thank you," Sal said heavily. His cold hand patted Sal on the shoulder and Orgrimmar smiled and said, "You have done very well. The young great chief." This was an undeniable victory. We should be laughing. Shouldn't we? Yes. Sal was halfway through his words when his face suddenly changed. Not only him, but the entire Horde hero group was in shock. The earth was trembling. Something huge was breaking out of the ground. In Naxxramas, various alarms were blaring. Even though the floating fortress wouldn't be affected by the tremors of the ground, the elemental waves that were as strong as tsunamis still surged over, causing the entire fortress to sway like a lone boat in the middle of a stormy sea. Duque's voice echoed throughout the fortress. Open the protective shield. Lower the altitude. Move the fortress to the north. Close all the cannons and protective doors. Grab onto something that can stabilize your body and resist the impact. Naxxramas, who was thousands of meters in the air, was already in such a sorry state, let alone the frontline soldiers. Even if Duque had expected Thun to erupt and withdrew the coalition forces at the Beetle Wall, the Beetle Gate could not be left undefended, so he still arranged a 1,000-man brigade there. However, a few kilometers to the north of the Beetle platform, there was a 30,000-strong mechanized army. The soldiers were all sitting on the steam-tracked armored vehicles during shifts, and they could attack or retreat as they pleased. From the looks of it, the 1,000-man team was doomed. The earth was roaring, and tens of thousands of tons of boulders arched up under the evil power, breaking through the sea of sand and floating to the ground. One by one, the sand dunes rose high and then exploded like bombs, sending rocks flying in all directions. The coalition soldiers only saw a blur, and countless disgusting tentacles, like sharp knives piercing through a piece of paper, grew out of the sea of sand. These tentacles, with terrifying giant white hooks on their tips, or a large disgusting eyeball, spun and pounced on every coalition soldier. The soldiers who had no time to react were easily pierced through, or their whole bodies were torn into several pieces like a piece of paper. Those disgusting tentacles with a large number of barbs on the surface were already frightening enough. There were also a large number of eyeball tentacles, using their purple-white eyeballs to emit terrifying blue rays. The damage wasn't fatal, but this ray, which was similar to mental whip, brought great pain to every soldier who was hit. No. What is this? Fight back. Fight back. To be honest, artillery at close range was a tragedy. But the coalition soldiers had no choice, and their swords could hardly cause any damage to these tentacles. On the contrary, as long as they hesitated, it was likely that they would be carried into the depths of the earth together with the tank. The huge pit, like a whirlpool, swallowed countless coalition soldiers. Was there a huge mouth with countless teeth under the quicksand? Or was it a wriggling mouth? In grief and panic, the soldiers had no time to think. But everyone knew that this should be the ancient god Thun that the higher-ups of the Alliance had repeatedly emphasized. Every soldier guarding the Beetle Gate had been informed of the risks here in advance, and they had even left a suicide note at the request of the commander. They couldn't accept it. They were the best soldiers of the Alliance and the Horde. They took turns to guard, maintaining the highest vigilance, but still couldn't do anything, and were one-sidedly slaughtered. It wasn't that Duque didn't prepare a way out for them. More than 20 portals were open there 24 hours a day. Regardless of day or night, there were 3 platoons of Griffin Knights, Hippogriffs, or Wyverns in the sky to receive them at any time. But everything happened too quickly, and almost in an instant, all the portals were destroyed, and all the aerial knights were shot down by the tentacles. At this point, since there was no way out, many people mustered up all their courage, roared, and rushed towards the wriggling tentacles with mortar shells or explosives. Boom, boom, boom. Explosions rang out continuously. When Duque reacted and opened a new portal to receive them, only 68 out of a full team of 1,000 returned, and most of them were left with lifelong disabilities. Duque was silent, and his face was ashen. He knew how terrifying Thun was, but Jaina gently pulled Duque's hand. Don't blame yourself, you've already done very well. Varrock Salyafar stood at the side with an agitated expression. His long fangs were clenched, and his green face seemed to have turned a dark green. Magni was the most agitated, because they wanted to retreat at any time. This team of 1,000 was the most mechanized, which also meant that the ratio of dwarves was the highest. He walked over, and his heavy armor made his steps seem even heavier. Duque, I'm only asking you. We waited for 5 days. Was it worth it? Magni wasn't questioning Duque's decision. Actually, he was the same as many of the Alliance's powerhouses. He didn't understand why Duque had waited for 5 days. If waiting for the Horde's powerhouses was a bonus of 1, but Si-Thun's strength was a bonus of 10, then he might as well go and fight Si-Thun right from the start after killing the twin emperors. Duque couldn't tell Magni the answer, but his eyes shone with determination. He only answered Magni with one word: worth it. Chapter 1335. Magni smiled. It was a bitter smile. That's good. Then my old brother can rest in peace. No wonder Magni was so excited. The more dangerous the mission, the more elite the troops. Dwarves might seem to be good at fighting, but they were actually built up over time. Dwarves had very long lives. Although they couldn't compare to elves, they could live for a few hundred years. Those who were lost this time were all old brothers who had been with Magni for many years. It had been 20 years since the second battle of the Dark Portal. Not to mention personal relationships, even if it was just a simple superior-subordinate relationship, the death of so many highly mechanized elite veterans would still be heartbroken. They had to defend against the Beetle Gate. If they just used bugs to rush out like before, Silithus would be covered in bugs, and that would be hard to clean up. This was the dilemma of the commander. Duque sighed. Bulang, after confirming that Naxxramas is safe, cover it with artillery. Even if we can't kill Si-Thun, don't let its tentacles grow endlessly. Understood. The third brother of the Bronzebeard family nodded. Very soon, the entire fortress was filled with the sound of artillery. Naxxramas, the Heavenbreaker, and many other flying battleships used violent artillery shells to cover the entire north side of the Ankaraj temple. Did you notice? Magni asked 2 minutes later. Looking at the temple roof that had exploded in the artillery fire and the huge pillars that had collapsed, Duque replied, "Yes, the divine power shield has disappeared." The enemy's defense had weakened, which wasn't necessarily a good thing. The biggest possibility was that Si-Thun had always had excess divine power to protect the entire territory. If it was compared to loosening 5 fingers in an attempt to grab the enemy's fist, now it was like pulling back all 5 fingers and clenching them into a fist, ready to fight against the allied forces. At this time, an orc messenger ran into the command center. "The Great Chief and the others are back." Almost as soon as he finished speaking, the door of the command center opened again. Under the salute of 12 Alliance and Horde guards, the burly Horde men returned. "Duque, how is the situation? The tribe can attack at any time." Sal's face was filled with exhaustion, but his eyes were still shining. Grom and Kane, who had worked with Duque before, felt the same way. Even though Grom only had one arm left, he still had the strength to wield Bloodhowl. Duque smiled. "Warriors of the tribe, you need to rest." Grom stepped forward. Just as he was about to speak, Duque gestured for him to keep quiet. "I don't mean to underestimate the tribe's powerhouses, but Si-Thun's momentum is at its peak. Is it appropriate for us to clash head-on with them? Was it appropriate? Of course not. Even if they joined forces, the allied forces would still be the weaker side. After all, Si-Thun was still a true god. Duque ignored the reactions of the experts in the tribe and turned around. "Tyrant, I'll have to trouble you for the next 2 days. You don't have to use your full strength. Just use the small starfall to get rid of all the tentacles that it's growing out." Understood. Tyrant combed her hair and nodded. To control such a huge meteorite with such a ridiculous mass and kinetic energy, Tyrant obviously needed to expend a lot of energy. But ordinary starfall could be fired every 10 minutes as long as she had Alun's divine power to replenish it, let alone once every 8 hours. Duque looked at Sal again. "I have confidence in doing this. Please forgive me for not being able to tell you right now. Right now the warriors of the tribe need to rest. 1 day is not enough. At least 3 days. Sal did not waste any time and directly agreed. "Okay. On the 4th day, we will gather to kill the god." Sal stretched out his green hand that was even bigger than a bear's paw. Duque smiled and shook hands with Sal. This was a historic handshake. At this moment, No one realized what this handshake meant. It had to be said that Duque was very kind. The warriors of the tribe had just finished fighting in the ruins of Ankh-Raj. If they directly followed the alliance to fight Si-Thun, it would be a great victory. No one could estimate the losses that would follow. After all, at this moment, most of the warriors of the tribe were injured. The wounds could be repaired with nature magic or holy light. What about the lost physical strength, spirit, and blood? Anyone who overdrew their energy from strenuous exercise would be tired that night and would not have any energy the next day. Duque gave them a full 3 days of rest, which was very rare for the warriors of the tribe. In order to ensure the quality of their rest, they were even placed in an independent space in the center of Naxxramas, enjoying a quiet holiday without listening to the sound of gunfire all day long. 4 days later, on April 1st, year 22 of the Dark Portal, a day that was a bit funny for the travelers, the Allied forces attacked. 3 consecutive days of carpet bombing turned the entire Ankh-Raj temple into ruins. Si-Thun tried to fight back, but Bulang made full use of the range of the cannons and kept teasing Si-Thun at least 5,000 meters away from the edge of the Ankh-Raj temple. Now, there were basically no tentacles on the surface of the temple ruins. Let's go. Under Duque's order, the Alliance, the tribe, and a certain black dragon princess in human form, a total of 40 people set off from Naxxramas on a pure-blooded firehawk. They set off in the early morning and rushed straight into the huge hole created by the collapse of the entrance of the Ankh-Raj temple. Almost as soon as they entered the hole, Duque and the others received a grand welcome. Countless tentacles broke through the rock stratum and appeared around the dark cave walls. They writhed madly with their claws and fangs bared. Looking from afar, the blurry writhing in the darkness was accompanied by a terrifying sound, which made many heroines feel numb. Damn it! Why does it seem like we've lost our minds and sent ourselves into Si-Thun's mouth as snacks? Gavin Rad complained fiercely. Actually, it's pretty much the same, Duque replied casually. If you knew later that many people had the chance to be swallowed into Si-Thun's stomach and fight for their lives, would you be furious? Duque didn't tell them all about this strategy, because apart from the ancient titans, no one really had the experience of fighting Si-Thun. In particular, he didn't want to use the theory of fate that he had used to scare people into recruiting underlings on the tribe. As the pure-blooded firehawk descended, suddenly, a rock wall in the 12 o'clock direction of the main force exploded. Jaina raised her hand, and several elemental light bullets shot in that direction. The exploding fire elements lit up the area as if it were daytime. A monster in the shape of a big earthworm with a huge mouth jumped out. Arrow. Gavin Rad was shocked. No. It's even smaller. Queen Sylvanas had sharp eyes and immediately determined that the size was wrong. Bah. We've even killed its old man. Why would we be afraid of a small one? Chapter 1336. That being said, everyone was descending quickly on the pure-blooded firehawks. How to deal with this big guy was definitely a problem. It would definitely be a joke if the main force went over. Apart from Kudrin Wildhammer, no one in the Allied army was good at aerial combat. The pure-blooded firehawk's flames were really not enough against this huge monster that was at least 100 or 200 meters long. The huge earthworm bared its fangs and pounced over, bringing with it a large amount of rubble, as it came crashing down with the momentum of a collapsing mountain. Under the illumination of the flares, everyone could clearly see that the squirming mouth was like a dense concentric circle from the outside to the inside. Each circle was made up of countless sharp teeth. It was not hard to imagine that if anyone was swallowed, they would definitely be torn into countless pieces in an instant. A few of the heroines shuddered. Just when everyone thought that Duque would send out Onyxia, Duque casually waved his hand. 5 seemingly small fireballs appeared out of thin air and shot straight at the monster's lower jaw. The 5 fireballs were aimed at the back half of the circular mouth. The 5 dots were very clear. If it was his first time meeting this guy, Duque might be flustered. However, after killing Oro in the Battle of Mount Hyjal, Duque had already figured out the physiological structure of the entire Oro family. Strictly speaking, Oro was very similar to an earthworm, a low-level annelid. This type of annelid usually had multiple hearts. This kind of immature little Oro had a thick blood vessel on its back and abdomen. In the middle were 5 pairs of swollen blood vessels that were connected, and these blood vessels could beat rhythmically. By beating, blood could circulate throughout the body. For safety, it was also covered with a thick annelid shell. However, with the system scan, Duque had already calculated the rough defense of this hard shell. The 5 fireballs made a big turn in the air, drawing out a clear hook-shaped trajectory, and finally shot into the opening of the shell without hesitation. The 5 small fireballs entered little Oro's body. It did not seem to have any effect, but everyone noticed that the huge earthworm monster's body stiffened. Its body still maintained its pouncing posture, but that was due to the momentum from before. In less than 2 seconds, 5 heavy, muffled sounds came from all 5 places at the same time. 5 huge spurts of pus and blood splattered down, almost drenching the faces of everyone in the hero group. Wind. Gavinrad and Servanas moved at the same time, using a gust of wind to blow away the pus and blood that was gushing over. The strong corrosive pus and blood splashed on the rock wall in the opposite direction in the strong wind, and even corroded many of Sea Thun's small tentacles. Let's go. Duque took the lead and rushed into a cave in the southwest corner. I'm not going the wrong way, am I? Why don't I lead the way? I think we should trust our instincts. Magni bragged. Hee. Duke looked at the dwarf king with a pair of loving eyes. Jaina giggled. Do you think Duque did nothing these days? His magic net has already covered half of the Ankh-Kiraj shrine. Sun King Anastrian, who was walking at the back of the team, was shocked. Of course he knew what the magic net was, and he couldn't help but wonder, Sea Thun just let Duque's power seep into his territory like that? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the dark cave, flames lit up in an orderly fashion. They were clusters of fire elements floating in the air. They weren't attached to the walls, and they had nothing to do with the original structure of the cave. In the next moment, everyone suddenly realized that they could see through things. They realized that they could see beyond the cave walls. It wasn't true X-ray vision. Instead, there was a strong elemental light shining behind the walls of the cave. The light even passed through the walls, and the heroes could see it with their naked eyes. This is an elemental passage? Sun King was shocked. He had imagined countless times how big the gap between him and Dooku was. Now he saw it. The gap was so big that it made him despair. Duque's indescribably surging magic had already invaded every corner of this space. There was a clear elemental passageway at almost every fist-sized distance in the entire passageway. There was no need to specially connect to the elemental plane. With just a thought, he could draw out all kinds of elements from the surrounding passages for his own use. As long as he signed a contract to enter the magic net, Anastrian shuddered. The amount of magic, the purity of the elements, and the creative and revolutionary way of using them. Compared to this, every magic theory he had learned for thousands of years was simply a long and smelly foot-binding cloth. He deserved to be thrown into the trash heap of history. This wasn't just an increase in magic. At the same time, the network formed by these elemental passages was also a huge alarm system. There was no need for Duque to remind them. Everyone had already seen a tentacle as thick as a bucket breaking through the rock formation on the right side of the passage, trying to sneak in and attack. It drilled, and just as it was about to drill through the wall, it actually stopped there, waiting for its prey to take the bait. If not for the magic net's alarm, this would be the time to test their reaction. Unfortunately, Gavinrad snickered shamelessly. Then he carried the wind sword and pretended not to see, walking towards the tentacle. In front of him was Magni, who was also pretending not to know. Behind him was Queen Sylvanas, who already had an arrow on her bow. Bam! The huge tentacle suddenly attacked. It burst out of the wall, and immediately opened its purple eyes, preparing to give Gavinrad a mental lash. Unfortunately, if this sneak attack succeeded, then the Alliance of Heroes would not live up to its name. Before the eyeball tentacle's eyelids could fully open, the wind sword with the light of lightning slashed down. On the flank, the enlarged Inferno hammer was like an erupting volcano, about to erupt at the next moment. Queen Sylvanas' arrow was the fastest, and it arrived first even though it had been fired later. The eyeball tentacle's eyelids were only half opened when it was shot, and it twitched. The twitching was extremely short, but that was enough. The Inferno Hammer and Wind Sword fell at the same time, directly destroying the entire tentacle. Not only that, with the power of the magic net, the fire and lightning elements instantly backfired, spreading towards the depths of the ground in the direction that the tentacle had extended from. Hiss! An indescribable groan seemed to come from the depths of the ground. Facing the huge hole that the tentacle had made, Gavinrad made an arrogant gesture of cutting his throat. Sithun, your Lord Gavinrad is here. Wash yourself and prepare to be made into squid tentacles. Uft! Duque spurted out. Gavinrad was really a fox using the tiger's might to intimidate others. Speaking of which, making squid tentacles from something that would affect the appearance of the city. Would anyone eat it? Chapter 1337. As Duque and his team of heroes stormed through the underground tunnels of the Temple of Ankh-Karaj, the floating fortress, Naxxramas, was still on a level 1 combat alert. Plop plop plop. In the stronghold's enemy-seeking department, the sentries immediately heard this strange sound. The long-eared elf girl was slightly stunned. This was definitely not the sound of the ocean. The nearest lake or ocean was thousands of miles away. She subconsciously adjusted the magic mirror to find the source of the sound. Soon, she saw an unexpected scene. It was as if the scene was happening in front of her. A strange black ripple spread out in the morning light, which was incompatible with the golden light of the rising sun. 3,000 yards to the northeast, enemy attack. The elf girl's sharp shout seemed to have awakened the entire fortress. Bulang Bronzebeard, who was in charge of the fortress, was the first to react. He immediately shouted into the microphone used for magic transmission. Baoyan, retreat immediately. Baoyan, the newest flying battleship of the Alliance. Thanks to the assembly line-like production model, the flying battleships of the Iron Furnace Castle were now produced at an average rate of 1 every 3 months. The dwarves and gnome craftsmen of the Iron Furnace Castle worked day and night in 3 shifts. The 3 docks were built on top of the mountains. They were built with steel directly smelted from the Iron Stove Castle's smelting furnace, and the toughest 100-year-old trees in Lochmoden as the deck. The deck was covered with steel sheets and equipped with standard cannons. Each dock could produce a battleship in 9 months. Unlike the meticulously built Heavenbreaker and Black Pearl battleships, the Alliance also needed a large number of medium and light battleships as protection ships according to the needs of the war. The cruiser, whose full name was the Cleveland class, or the Kappa class for short, was a product of this requirement, which focused on enhancing anti-air firepower. No one knew why the founder of the Alliance's mechanized air force, Duque, insisted on using this name, and even looked like he would roll on the ground if he didn't agree. In any case, who could argue with Duque on this kind of thing? On average, the 6 medium-sized shipyards had 2 Cadet-class cruisers flying out of the shipyards every month. No one would have thought that after Duque and his elites broke into the Ankh-Karaj shrine, the first ship to be tested would be this new cruiser. It was as if a giant water droplet had dripped into a lake that was as calm as a mirror. Starting from a single point, it expanded in all directions and rapidly spread to the side of Baoyan. This cruiser had 2 huge propellers as its power source, so of course it wasn't propelled by backward steam. Steam did not have enough power to carry this light cruiser, that weighed over 10,000 tons. Using the power core of the latest sharp elemental furnace, it could generate 100,000 horsepower. But for a 10,000-ton ship, 100,000 horsepower was still not enough to generate enough instantaneous kinetic energy to get it out of this misfortune. In the main control room of the stronghold, Bulang's face was ashen as he watched this almost static scene. The moment he saw this huge spatial fluctuation, he smelled the kind of power that had once appeared on Sithun's body, but it was more majestic and more difficult to match. It was a terrifying power that stood above the mortal world and coexisted with the planets. The power of God. The captain of Baoyan, Favaro Violent Fist, was the most senior steam tank commander. Almost at the same time that the stronghold sounded the alarm, he opened a magic shield. However, when a huge tentacle that was 100 meters long appeared from the spatial ripples and swept towards Baoyan, All evasion and resistance were rendered useless. Wherever the tentacle went, the elemental lines of law disintegrated one after another. Bulang could only watch helplessly as his old subordinate's ship was easily crushed into pieces like a dog whose neck and bones had been twisted by a python. Time seemed to slow down, and every piece of debris was spinning in the air. The barrel of a gun, polished to a shine. Half of the deck that still seemed to smell the fresh paint. A short and fat human figure that was wailing and still waving its hands and feet, but was quickly falling. When everything came into view, Bulang found that his heart was deeply pierced. The northeast corner of Naxxramas suddenly lit up. It was the light of wind and thunder. Aurelia and Sasha, who had been left behind for some reason, drew their bows and knocked arrows on a platform. The atmosphere was surging, and large masses of dark clouds instantly gathered in the sky above them. Half a second later, lightning flashed and thunder roared, and the sound of thunder rumbled through the entire northeast corner of the stronghold. Soon, the charge was completed. With the support of the wind and thunder, 2 bolts of lightning formed a spiral in the air, and fiercely crossed the void of 3,000 meters. They hit the huge tentacle that was wreaking havoc. However, it was useless. Admittedly, the joint attack of the Windrunner sisters had caused terrible damage to the tentacle. The hole that was big enough for a carriage to pass through looked really shocking. But in less than 5 seconds, after a violent squirming, everyone in the stronghold and the surrounding flying warships who were watching this scene found that the terrible tentacle had actually begun to heal on its own. Varrock muttered, his arm holding the axe trembling a little. As expected of an ancient god. At this moment, time seemed to stop around them. Be it the hourglasses used to calculate time or the ancient mechanical clocks, they all stopped working. This is... The Windrunner sisters' eyes widened. With the best eyesight, they saw that the floating sand in the sky had begun to gather in a strange way. A power that they had truly seen before, evoking a distant memory in their hearts. That was in Lordaeron, when King Terenas was still alive. A giant dragon claw made of sand and stone appeared out of thin air and grabbed the lively tentacle. Everyone who witnessed this scene was filled with shock. The power of a true god could only be easily suppressed by the existence of the realm of gods. Almost without giving the onlookers time to think, there was a loud bang, and the giant tentacle quickly withered, turning into large pieces of broken rocks, falling from thousands of meters in the sky. The huge rocks fell on the soft surface of the desert. The impact of the hundreds of tons of debris and the acceleration of gravity directly made a loud roar like a cannon. There was no cannon fire, but it sounded like Naxxramas had set off a storm of cannons again. In midair, the giant dragon claw continued to tearing large sections of tentacles out of the void. This time, it seemed that there was no time to petrify. The broken tentacle made a sound like tearing cloth, and then black blood gushed out. Then there was an inhuman scream, echoing over the entire Silithus. Chapter 1338. Naturally, Duque was aware of the earth-shattering battle outside. Taking advantage of the time when Si-Thun was withdrawing his forces, Duque attacked while the enemy retreated. His magic net, which had almost nibbled away at the deepest part of the enemy's nest, could ensure that magic messages were unobstructed to the greatest extent. The hero group was still advancing. Although they lined up in a more reasonable oval-shaped formation, the tentacles were everywhere. After discovering that they could be sensed, Si-Thun's tentacles chose to attack at a faster and fiercer speed. They used speed to attack. With so many tentacles attacking at the same time, everyone's skills could be seen at a glance. Almost everyone had been attacked. As they advanced in the underground cave while fighting, Sal felt that there was a problem. It was just like how the Horde lacked warriors and had to recruit the Forgotten Ones to supplement Orgrim and the other undead warrior heroes. Because of the disappearance of Ronan and Turalian, the Alliance had to supplement a group of second-line powerhouses. But second-line my ass. Where did these guys come from? A red-haired female elf with an impressive bust, who almost bursts in Doriai's red military uniform, walked proudly next to Queen Sylvanas. This female elf who called herself Legolas claimed to be a warrior, and was also holding Estel's claw, which was classified as a glove. This thing came from the Molten Core Magmadar's Spoils of War. It was a set with both the left and right claws. At first, she didn't say a word, but her aura was already very frightening. That was the aura of someone who had been in a high position for a long time. Without sufficient strength and confidence, it was impossible to have such an aura. She walked next to Sylvanas. It was hard to tell whether she was the queen or Sylvanas was the queen. At first, Sal only thought that this guy's aura was a bit fierce. What happened next scared him so much that his eyeballs almost popped out. A huge sea thun tentacle broke through the rock wall and stabbed directly at her and Queen Sylvanas. Normally, Queen Sylvanas' arrow would arrive first, but who knew that Legolas' movement was even faster? The claw of that mediocre Estel swung over, and the bystanders only felt a sudden gust of wind. In the blink of an eye, all he saw was a bloody limp tentacle. In less than half a second, the tentacle bounced up high and fell heavily again, emitting a burning smell and the sound of a leaking ball lying on the ground softly. A tentacle that could smash a steam tank, or even a destroyer into smithereens, lay motionless on the ground like a rotten sausage. What was even more ridiculous was that this woman actually broke a molten core level glove. The originally sharp claws were missing a large piece, revealing the white and tender fingers. What the hell was this? The woman's finger was fine, but the molten core level glove had exploded. Could it be that the gloves couldn't keep up with her strength? Sal was going crazy. The same thing happened to the other three. An eyeball tentacle burst out, attempting to attack a mage called Dogsh*T. Oh goss. In the end, this guy didn't use the magic net, nor did he connect to the elemental plane. He didn't even use an incantation. A white sea urchin that seemed to be made of pure ice flashed by, and in the next moment, that terrifying tentacle suddenly burst like a water pipe. Countless amounts of blood gushed out from the cracks of various sizes, converging into a stream of blood beside it. This tentacle that had caused damage to many heroes since the start of the war had reached the end of its life in an instant. There was also a high elf named Dom, a warrior with a long black braid. He didn't even have any equipment, and he directly hammered a sharp, curved tentacle with his fist like a drum. That tentacle seemed to have been ruthlessly smashed by a heavy industrial mechanical arm that could lift a 1,000-ton ship, and immediately went limp. Since when did the elves produce so many strong people? Thrall looked at Orgrim first. This former chief, who was already a death knight, shrugged his shoulders. His expression was clearly saying, if these fellows had been around during World War II at the Dark Portal, why would I fight Kuel Salas? Originally, Sal thought that the person next to him understood the situation the best. Who would have thought that Sun King was trying hard to keep a straight face while looking at Goss with frightened eyes? Damn. To be able to scare the Breaking Dawn level Sun King like this, there was no need to ask. This person must have a terrifying background. At this time, Wajin gently poked Sal's waist with his elbow. Following Wajin's gaze, Sal saw a strange aura on the Alliance's side. Because Malfuri and Stormrage had fallen into a deep sleep, Fandral Staghelm was the boss of the Cenarian Circle again. Logically speaking, there should be no Night Elf Druid that he didn't know. But there was one in front of him. The female druid who claimed to be Sala had a typical Night Elf green waterfall hair. Except for her pair of eyes that never opened. No matter how you looked at it, she was a typical Night Elf. Her heal, Rejuvenate and Wild Growth were so smooth that even Fandral, who claimed to be the #1 druid, could not compare. It had been so long since she showed off her skills, and Fandral had been pestering her for so long. Where are you from? A solitary practitioner? Are you interested in joining the Cenarian Circle? The Way of Druids needs a master like you. His interest in Sala was not fake. He expressed deep disgust for Tyron's excessive approach to the Alliance. Although Malfurion had fallen into a deep sleep and was no longer in power, he could not murder Malfurion. Within the Night Elves, he continued to rope in stronger masters to increase his faction's influence. Who knew that Sala would ignore him, and when she was asked anxiously, she asked him to go ask Duque. Fandral was depressed to death. Unfortunately, he was in a state of battle, and he did not dare to bother her too much. Otherwise, Duque would slap him and say that he was absent-minded. That bitch tyrant would not protect him. At the same time, on the void battlefield, Krasis was sitting on pins and needles, because he was sitting on the throne of the one he respected the most. Not far away from him was an illusion of a gigantic blue dragon coiled in the air. At a glance, there was indeed an incomparably huge blue dragon entrenched there. If anyone could see through the thick elemental turbulence that enveloped the blue dragon, they would clearly see that there was no such huge blue dragon in that position. There was only a frost elemental dragon with a bitter smile on its face. Krasis was displeased. Saffron, if you expose me, I will not forgive you. Saffron rolled its eyes. You're blaming me? Beside Krasis, a figure in a cloak smiled bitterly. It's fine. This plan should be perfect. Even if something happens, we will prioritize protecting the void battlefield. That's for the best. Chapter 1339. Even further away from Azeroth, an interstellar battleship was quietly lurking in the asteroid zone. This was the extreme position to monitor planet Azeroth. What's up with the 4 lizards? Same old. The red and blue auras are still exaggerated. The bronze and green auras are hidden. These 4 lizards are really calm. Their home is about to be destroyed. Should we add another wave of attacks? *T. Whoever wants to go can go. Without receiving Lord Kill Jaden's order, I won't let my brothers go for nothing. The words of these 2 Void Lords also represented the thoughts of many lords of the Burning Legion. That's right, as long as they died outside the Twisting Void, they could theoretically revive infinitely. This was on the premise that their souls could run back. For demons with almost infinite lifespans, there was the great achievement of the guy whose name was Taboo blowing up the Twisting Void fortress 10,000 years ago. There was also Mount Hyjal in Azeroth, where Archimonde died. Not only were they afraid of death, but they were also afraid of reviving. This was because reviving would inevitably cause damage to the soul. It was fine once or twice, but if they revived too many times, the damage to the soul would naturally be severe, which would bring about a decline in strength. This was often how Void Lords were replaced. Now, other than the most belligerent Abyss Lords and Doomguards, many Demon Lords were a little hesitant. No one would have thought that Duque had actually calculated the frequency of the Burning Legion's attacks, and played a trick right under their noses. Whether it was Krasis or Saffron, as the capable subordinates of their boss, their auras were of the same origin. What Duque needed to do was to increase the elemental waves that they emitted. Alexstrasza was a nature element, and Maligos was mainly a frost element. After connecting to the magic net, they were about the same when observed from afar. Duque gambled that the Burning Legion's spies could not go deep into the void fortress that the Titans had left for the dragons, and could only observe from afar. If he could not deceive the Burning Legion, Duque would fulfill his promise and immediately send the 4 back to the void battlefield. This was why the 4 Dragon Kings had the time to come to the underground cave to be thugs. In order not to scare Thun, Duque also asked them to suppress their strength and enter in human form. Alright, before giving Thun a surprise, I'll surprise my own people first. As they went deeper into the cave, everyone could clearly feel that the evil aura was increasing endlessly. A large number of tentacles drilled everywhere. Everyone could vaguely sense that the tentacles seemed to feel the pulse of the earth while injecting venom-like substances into every corner of the earth, even deep into the planet Azeroth. When the venom decayed everything, it would suck it back and use it as nutrients for its growth. He suddenly understood why Titan had beaten up the 4 great ancient gods back then and sealed them. If the Curse Land's Gate of Darkness was the most straightforward form of absorption, causing everything to wither and all life to be extinguished, then the Curse Land's Gate of Darkness was the most straightforward form of absorption. Then what Thun did was the darkest corruption and the most brutal plunder. Speed up. Under Duque's command, everyone suddenly found that the tentacles no longer drilled into the ground, sides and ceiling of the passage. This was because all the tentacles had been directly mobilized by Duque to form magic, and directly attacked from outside the walls. In the absence of interference, everyone could directly use the crystal to summon the insect mounts. 4-legged insects, fast and stable. It would be strange if they could. 4 N-shaped legs full of spikes. Any girl would have goosebumps at the sight of it. However, in the desert area, there was no mount faster than this thing. These insects the size of small cars were summoned, and whether they were willing or forced, they could only obediently follow the orders of the crystal that contained their emperor's will and bitterly move towards the more dangerous depths at high speed. From the outside, Sithun's nest was a huge ring-shaped building. Next to the not-so-exaggerated gate, Duque gave one last reminder. Remember, the key is to disperse the formation. As long as we stand together, we will be infinitely connected by the rays of the eyeballs, and then we will all be wiped out. We F***CK. Duque couldn't help but curse, dog, sh**t. That's right. The self-centered Malygos, who was pretending to be the best in the world, actually didn't listen to Duque and rushed in first. As the ancestor of Azeroth magic, Malygos boasted of being the king of magic. Needless to say, he didn't have a good attitude towards Duque. Even though Duque had deliberately avoided using his name when he advanced to become a demigod, and the range of the weave's usage avoided the dragons and fixed it on mortal races like humans, night elves, blood elves, and dwarves, it still didn't stop Malygos from being unhappy with Duque. Malygos' authority in magic had always been limited to the blue dragon race. This old man felt that everyone in the world who played magic had to listen to him. Perhaps in his heart, Duque was still the little morning star wizard he had met all those years ago, needing to kneel down and worship him. He could ignore all of Duque's achievements and all of Duque's efforts to protect this world. If you're so awesome, then fight Sithun alone if you can. Duque scolded. He really scolded out loud. He had spent so much effort to use the time difference to pull 6 demigods to surround Sithun. Did he think it was easy? The experts of the Alliance tribe were dumbfounded. The 3 dragon kings were flustered and exasperated. Wait, are you crazy? Alexstrasza, who had changed her name to Legolas, almost wanted to slap Malygos and drag him back. Humph. Malygos snorted coldly, completely ignoring the Red Dragon Queen. At this moment Sithun, who was in the middle of the huge circular hall in the darkness, slowly revealed its disgusting appearance. At first glance, it looked a bit like an incense burner. Its fat, brown body was full of thorn-like barbs. It was covered with dark purple eyes and yellow-black pupils that people with trypophobia most did not want to see. On the body with the base of the incense burner, there were more than 10 hooks that curved towards the sky. In the middle, there was an even larger eyeball. This huge eyeball with a diameter of at least 7 stories slowly opened after sensing the arrival of Malygos in human form. It was hard to tell whether it was ridicule or sarcasm. Sithun's voice directly crossed the void and turned into mental power that entered the minds of every challenger. However, the voice was clearly directed at Malygos. It was not like a declaration. It was more like a hint or even a curse. Malygos, death is not far from you. You will die. You will betray your siblings. You will be abandoned by your siblings. You are too weak. Duque heart skipped a beat. You're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.